Yes.
I'd like to call the meeting to order.
Thank you.
This is a special meeting of the Judson Board of Trustees. It's hereby called to order at 6:01 p.m. I am pleased that you've taken time to join us this evening. In compliance with State Government Code on Open Meetings, tonight's agenda has been appropriately posted. These proceedings are being video and audio recorded and will become part of Judson's permanent legal record. In order that the tape adequately reflect these proceedings, please silence your mobile devices and refrain from talking while others are speaking. Once again, thank you and welcome from the entire school board, and I appreciate your interest. I will establish a quorum and call roll. Ms. King?
Shatanya King, present.
Ms. Rodriguez?
Jennifer Rodriguez, present.
Ms. Ryan?
Monica Ryan, present.
Ms. Canoyer?
Suzanne Canoyer, present.
Ms. Eaton?
Deborah Eaton, present.
Ms. Stanford?
Laura Stanford, present.
And Jose Macias is also present. Now I yield it to Dr. Fields.
Yes, sir. Thank you, guys. Tonight is the fourth of our budget meetings, and we have several on the agenda tonight. I can tell you, we have Josh Haney from Moat Casey, and he's going to be Zooming in. So we're going to go ahead and put him on the Zoom so he can go over his presentation, and then shortly after we'll get into a discussion with Mr. Westerman from Samco. So first up is Mr. Haney from Moat Casey.
All right. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I couldn't make it there in person. We've been busy traveling all across the state since the regular session ended, explaining all of the fun things that our friends in Austin did for public education this past session. Okay, so I'm going to start with just a little bit of a legislative update, and then I've been meeting with your finance staff over the past few weeks to sort of help them understand the implications that you did and also what the legislature didn't do. And that's really the main takeaway from this session. This session is really more notable for what they didn't pass than what they did pass, unfortunately. So the first thing, go ahead, yeah, go on to the next slide. Yeah, the first thing I'll touch on is the state budget. This is the one piece of legislation that that lawmakers are required to pass every session. And you can see, and actually this slide, when I sent it to you guys, it had not, the budget had not been certified by the controller. That happened yesterday. So the budget is on its way to the governor's desk for his signature, and then it will become law. But the headline really with the budget is that it continues current law funding that was established under House Bill 3 and then tweaked a little bit under House Bill 1525 last session. And it doesn't really include a whole lot of new funding as we sit here today, unfortunately, for public education. All of the new funding above current law is contingent on additional legislation passing. And so we'll talk more about that. Go on to the next slide. So the way to read the next few tables, next few slides that I have, just if it has a green check mark next to it, that means it's in the budget and there's a bill that authorizes that spending. Okay, so for the state to spend any money, it has to be money for it in the budget, and then there has to be statutory authorization. Okay, and so that's sort of the basic rules here. And so you can see the first item, they're continuing current law tax compression. This was put in place by House Bill 3. And so they're spending $5.3 billion just to continue that tax compression that's required under that statute. They are increasing the golden penny yields. And so what that means is there's a portion of your M&O tax rate. You guys have 5 golden pennies. And so that means those pennies are becoming even more valuable this next school year. So in terms of new money for your budget, This is really the main area where new money will come from, just those golden pennies state aid, and they did in the 22-23 school year. The state, I'm sorry, I didn't know if I was picking up background noise or was there a question?
Not yet. No, sir.
No, okay, sorry. The state also made an appropriation of almost $600 million to maintain or to sort of take some of the edge off the TRS active care premium growth. They're trying to rein that in to be at least less than 10%. So that appropriation is in the budget. The curriculum bill passed. That was House Bill 1605, and there's an appropriation in the budget for that. And so this was a major initiative from TEA this session. They are trying to offer sort of open source curriculum materials for every district in the state to allow them to choose to use. This will not be a requirement. This is something a district can opt into. And if you do, then those curriculum materials will be paid for by the state. You'll get an extra allotment to pay for those, so that's the access to the curriculum, as well as printing and shipping costs. There's a separate allotment for that, and so that would come as new money to the district if you also chose to. There's also some enhancements to the instructional materials and technology allotment. This fund kind of flows outside of the normal school finance formulas, and it's accessible and you directly on materials or technology. Those year, the SBOE comes out with a proclamation for things that new curriculum that can be purchased. And so this appropriation sort of restores that fund close to historical levels. Last session, that there were some cuts there, and so we're sort of starting to get back to normal here. One thing I'll point out is this is not what the maximum that the state could appropriate under statute, right? So we're not getting all of what lawmakers could provide under this, back in line with sort of historical levels. The main new bill, the new funding that is coming this session. So again, pretty much everything I talked about so far, the golden penny, the current law compression, all of that, that's really just current law, what was passed in prior sessions, continuing forward, right? Those bills have ongoing costs, okay? In terms of new money on top of current law, the only real thing that we have for this session, as we sit here today, is House Bill 3. And House Bill 3 is the school safety bill. Statewide, the cost is $300 million. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what's in House Bill 3 in a moment. Some really on a statewide basis, that's a pretty meager funding increase. And within the bill are some pretty sizable and things that the district will have to comply with.
Mr. Haney, can
Pretty
I ask you a
serious
question? Can I ask-
requirements and pretty serious consequences for non-compliance. And again, we'll talk about
Got
those
it.
more.
How do we?
There's an increase in the new instructional facilities allotment.
It's
This
on.
is an allotment that if you're building a new campus, you can access these funds for equipping that campus with furniture, or, IT infrastructure, whatever you need for sort of
Mr. Haney?
startup costs for those new campuses. Yes.
Mr. Haney, we have
You
a question.
said that it was a meager increase.
The school safety allotment.
Right,
yes.
right. So how much are you thinking? 10, 15,000 per campus?
Well, yeah, and I'll get into the details.
Got it.
I'll get into the details on the slide in a moment, but yeah, just to answer your question, it's this past school year, you got $9.72 per ADA for school safety. We're taking that $9.72, bumping it up to $10 per ADA, so you get whopping 28 to 80. And then you get $15,000 per campus. Okay, and so one thing that came up in our conversations with your district finance staff is, okay, well, what is TEA going to qualify as a campus if we partner with the county on the JJAEP or pre-K facility that's shared? Does that count? And so some of those things we don't know exactly. TEA is going to have to provide some information on whenever they're implementing this third rulemaking. So we don't know exactly how TEA is going to qualify a campus, but the statute provides $15,000 per campus.
Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that over and above our bond money?
Well, this is different from the bond money because what the state is saying, and basically on all the green checks that you guys saw on there, those are things that can pretty much go through, haven't necessarily been passed. This one is on its way through. The one that he's going to talk about a little bit later calls for an armed person on every campus with an increase of, like he said, meager funds. Definitely not enough to fund an armed person on every campus. So he's going to speak to the logistics of that. And we have our police officers and safety team looking into it as well. Go ahead, Mr. Haney.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, you can go on to the next slide. And yeah, I'll be touching on House Bill 3 in more detail later on. This is kind of doing an overview of what's in the budget.
The extra things that did not
Yeah,
go through.
yeah, we'll get into the details here shortly. The X's, as Dr. Fields was just saying, X's are things that are in the budget, but don't have a bill that authorizes that spending. Okay, so the money's there, it's sitting, set aside by the state, but if they don't pass a bill that authorizes that spending, that money's just going to sit there on the shelf, right? It's going to sit there in the bank and not get spent. Okay, the major item here, of course, is property tax relief. That is what the governor and speaker are arguing right now with the lieutenant governor on during the special session. We'll have some more on that at the end of the presentation. But again, that the bill during session was Senate Bill 3. House and Senate had different ideas on how to divvy out that $12.3 billion. Actually, the Senate wanted to do more for the homestead exemption. The House wanted to do some appraisal cap reduction and sort of apply that appraisal cap to more types of properties, to business properties, to commercial, industrial, all types of properties. And so again, different priorities. They both agree on the top line number of $12.3 billion, but they disagree on how that gets divvied out. What type of taxpayer gets that. School funding increases. There's $4 billion in the budget right now for new funding through the Foundation School Program. But House Bill 100, which was the main vehicle for that during session, that failed. We'll talk about House Bill 100 in a moment, but the talk just broke down really due to vouchers, which is the next item on the list there. The vouchers kind of derailed a lot of the public ed policy discussion. Budget for vouchers, if you look in there, there's school choice, $500 million for school choice. But Senate Bill 8, the Senate's voucher proposal, House Bill 100 got vouchers in it. All of those bills failed during session. Virtual education, as we sit here today, your students that are participating in virtual education, I'm not sure if Judson has a very robust virtual education program, but some districts do. Students that are participating under what's called the Local Remote Learning Program, which was part of Senate Bill 15 that was set up 2 years ago, those students will not generate state funding anymore because that expires September 1. Senate Bill 15 that stood up that program, that was sort of a temporary framework. They were supposed to come in this session and establish a permanent framework for funding virtual education. But again, this is another area they couldn't come to agreement. during the regular session. And so that bill failed. And so now, unless the governor called a special session on this, okay, I have this slide in here. This is really, I want folks to start to understand exactly what is in this budget. If you listen to some of that, the debate on in the Senate and particularly in the House, they kept on touting this budget passing the 88 as, you know, a huge increase to public ed funding, you know, a generational investment in public education, the greatest thing since sliced bread. And when you go and look at the actual numbers in the budget, it doesn't match up with those claims. And the reason it doesn't is because they were counting things that we don't normally count as new money for public education. So for example, those TRS appropriations I mentioned earlier for the TRS active care. That's money that's not going into enhancing the classroom experience of Texas public. So generally in historical sessions, we haven't counted that as new money for public education, for example. They're paying for enrollment growth. That's something the legislature does every year. Just paying for new students that move to Texas. They're counting that as new money for public education. That's not really new money. That's just, our funding system is paid on a per student basis, largely speaking. So it's just the state making good on the promises they already made, right? This is an increasing funding. So they have a very creative way of arriving at their total, the state does. This is the way we feel this is the way that's more truthful and honest reflection of what the state actually passed. So you can see here, what we've done is looked in Article 3, and you guys can go look in the budget and find these same numbers. You look in Article 3, this is the public education portion of the budget. You see we have the M&O state aid and the INS state aid. This is what the state is providing the school districts. In the 87th legislature, last session, they adopted a budget that had almost $52 billion in operations and debt aid. You can see on the 88th legislature, the budget was $48.6 billion. Okay, that's not the greatest increase in public education spending in a generation. Some numbers touted on the House floor. That is a $3.1 billion decline. Okay, so the state, and I think this is particularly notable when you consider where we started this session, right? We started the session with $60 billion in surpluses between the general revenue fund and the rainy day fund. So in a session where we went into it with $60 billion, they couldn't increase the funding for public education. I think is just a really, really unfortunate. And I hope that I hope that come November that voters remember exactly what transpired during the session. So I'll get off my soapbox here and we can go on to the next slide.
I'd ask that you go back to that slide and let me get
So
back
here's
on
House
it.
Bill 100. Again, I want to be very clear. This
Mr.
bill
Haynes?
did not. Yes.
I'd ask, there you go. Can we go back to the slide one more time?
Yeah.
So when the state came out, they said, we've got $32 billion and we're going to give it to everybody, and this is going to be the biggest thing since sliced bread. And then they took $3 billion away. That's a travesty in terms of public education. There was this huge surplus that they could give to the school districts, and that's what they said they were going to do. And then to take $3 billion from it is just, I don't understand it. And they continue to say, we're going to do what's best for the school districts, and they're talking about tax compressions and all the other stuff, but it's not about giving money to the school districts. And even the voucher thing, I'm sure that they would have went through with that if it would have gone through, but it didn't. But that would have been another thing that,
Take away from the school.
at least the public school system. Yes, ma'am. So I wanted to make sure our community understood that with this huge surplus, we lost $3 billion in the deal. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the other thing I want to point out is another sort of talking point spin you're going to hear a lot regarding school funding is with property tax compression and all the stuff, that the state is going to be back at 50% state share, right? So, ideally, or historically, the state has tried to get up to 50%, paying 50% of the cost, and then the other 50% comes from local tax collection. We want to get to 50% by increasing the state's investment in public schools, right? By offering more money, paying our teachers better. That's the way to get to 50%. The way the state has chosen to get to 50% is through tax compression, right? So lowering your ability to bring in local dollars to the system, but keeping the top line the same, right? And so that's one way to get to 50%. That doesn't help kids, though, right? That doesn't help provide a better educational experience for children. And so, again, I would just encourage y'all, if you hear that talking point, well, the state got to 50% of the foundation school program share. Just understand that there's two ways to 50%, right? They can increase their investment and match what your local taxpayers are doing, or they can reduce what the local taxpayers are paying, and you get to 50% either way. But one is not good for, it doesn't help kids, right? Okay. So with House Bill 100, when it came out of the House, we worked very closely with Representative King all session, and he is very much a public school advocate and supporter, and we appreciate it. He was the author of House Bill 100. When it came out of the House, it had about $5 billion in new money, switched over to enrollment-based funding, which makes the life of your finance staff much easier because then they don't have to deal with the volatility of attendance. It increases the basic allotment. It added some new allotments. It did a lot of good things for school funding. Fortunately, when it got over to the House, when it got over to the Senate, they ratcheted back a lot of that spending. They put vouchers in the bill. And that effectively killed it, right? The wheels came off at that point. That was no longer a bill that Representative King could support. And they tried to, come conference committee, and the Senate just wouldn't budge. And so really vouchers derailed what could have been a $5 billion in public school. I'm just coming to y'all with a lot of good news today, okay? So just buckle up. House Bill 3, I mentioned this. This is the school safety bill. This is really the only new money above current law that we saw this session. It's on the governor's desk waiting for him to sign it. And it increases the school safety allotment from $9.72 per ADA to $10 per ADA. And then adds the additional campus-based component of $15,000 per campus. Okay, so for that, again, fairly meager increase in funding, you have a whole lot more requirements and a whole lot more consequences for noncompliance. And you can see those in those last two bullet points there. So the big requirement is, of course, that all campuses have to have at least one armed individual on site during regular school hours, okay? There is what's called a good cause exception in the bill, but just to be clear, Mo, Casey, we're not attorneys, we're just school finance experts, and so we certainly encourage y'all to consult with your counsel on exactly how to comply with this and what options are available under this good cause exception. But our reading of it is that it doesn't allow you to, it's not really a loophole per se, for you to not have an armed individual on campus. We think it's more, instead of having a school intentionally allows the district to contract that out, come in compliance that way. But we do think that this is ultimately something that districts will have to comply with. But again, I would encourage you to work with your counsel and explore your options for compliance there. I'm sorry, real quick, go back to that last bullet point. And so with these new requirements, and also TA has put out a lot of new requirements, standards with regards to safety. With just across the board, if you're not compliant with all these new things, TEA now has authority to install a conservator over the district for noncompliance. And then additionally, if the district's non-compliant, they can take the bond proceeds and repurpose them, right? So if you go to your community and say, we need new middle school, and your community agrees and votes on that and approves it, and then you issue those bonds, year down the line, TEA can come in and say, no, you're not compliant with the safety standards. You can't use those funds for the middle school. You got to put fencing up and all these other campuses and cameras and whatever else is required under those standards. Okay, so we think this is ripe for litigation, to say the least. We think that districts will almost certainly challenge this. And actually, would you guys mind muting the room? I'm getting a lot of feedback. If that would be okay. Thank you. So this is a problem that we think districts are, we're hoping that there's creative ways that districts can protect themselves from this. We're, again, disclaimer, we're not attorneys. This is an area your bond attorney will be very helpful in, hopefully, in thinking through and kind of exploring your options and figuring out how you can, protect the district if you guys are going, out for a bond issue in the future. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, right now they're arguing over property tax relief. This is the first called special session. Different ideas, again, between the House and the Senate, and really the governor. So the way you can kind of view this is we have the Governor Abbott and Speaker Phelan in one corner. They want to do everything through tax compression. And then we have Lieutenant Governor Patrick in the other corner. He wants to increase the homestead exemption to $100,000 and also do some tax compression. Okay. And so, they agree on the 12.3 billion, but still have differences on how to divvy that up. The tricky thing about House Bill 1 is the timing of it. Okay, so you'll note there in the first bullet point, the House has written this in a way that the voters must approve of this tax compression at the November election. Okay, you guys are aware of what your tax rate adoption process is. You're going to adopt your rate in August, right? And so your rate is already going to be set by the time voters even get to approve this. And so the way this is going to work is you adopt your rate, voters approve it, and then after the fact, your assessor collector is going to reduce your tax rate for purposes of the levy, okay, and the bill that gets sent out to your taxpayers. Okay, so for the first time in Texas history, right, your adopted tax rate is not going to equal the levy tax rate, okay, that your assessor collector uses for purposes of the tax bills. Okay. This is going to cause a lot of confusion. Tax assessor collectors don't understand how tax compression works. They don't understand school finance, largely speaking. And there's some nuances here to how they do this, how they reduce your tax rate. That is going to be very critical that they learn a little bit about school finance at the time this event, if it does pass. And so this is another area, like we've been talking to your finance staff on, getting them sort of briefed on this bill. It's passed the House, it still has to pass the Senate, and has to be signed by the governor and approved by the voters. So we have a couple steps before we get to this point. But this is a priority for the governor, a priority for Speaker Phelan in the House. So we think that it's got a pretty good chance of making it across the finish line. And so we need to start preparing for that possibility now. One thing I do want to mention about property tax, and that's fine, you can stay on the slide. I want to mention about property tax relief. Tax compression is the best way. If we have to provide property tax relief, and we're supportive of property tax relief given the way values have been going. Then there's a lot of ideas about property tax relief out there. But the best way for schools to provide property tax relief is through tax compression. Tax compression is the only way to provide property tax relief that's revenue neutral for school districts. It doesn't take money out of your budget, okay? A homestead exemption increase, the appraisal cap limits and changes to the appraisal cap, the growth limits there, that all takes value off the rolls and does not come with enough state aid to offset that impact, okay? So everything except for tax compression reduces money coming to the district, okay? So if ever asked by your representatives or public on what is the best type of property tax relief, the answer needs to be tax compression, right? That is the only way that's revenue neutral for school districts. Last little update here on House Bill 1. So the governor had 2 items on the call. He had tax compression, and he had a border security bill. Okay, the House came in, very quickly passed both bills, and then adjourned sine die. And that just means they ended their session, they went home, they got out of Dodge. Okay, and that's exactly what the governor wanted them to do. Okay, he applauded the House for passing legislation quickly and within the scope of the call. The Senate, of course, is now, and particularly Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, he's kind of out on a limb on his own now, right? He's dug in his heels. He's insistent on the homestead exemption going up to $100,000. And essentially the Senate comes in and gavels in every day and twiddles their thumb. They're just going to run out the clock essentially on this special session. And we may get to a point where nothing ends up passing. And then the governor will just call another special session. We'll be back at this again. So that's where we are now. As you can tell, it's been a very frustrating session for public education advocates. It's been a frustrating regular session. It's been a frustrating special called session. Eventually, the governor, we think, will call a special session on school finance. But when he does that, that's going to come with a debate about vouchers as well. Okay, so that's going to be challenging. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so here's what you guys are really wondering about. Sort of what does all this mean for Judson? And you can see here sort of what we're modeling based on the student count data that your district staff provided, based on the property values that we're getting from your CAD. And so just understand that this 23-24 data is very much, you got to put an asterisk next to all these numbers. It's very much a projection because all we have is preliminary numbers from your CAD, your county appraisal district, based on student attendance projections. Okay, so this is all, we're early in the process here. And so you can see the tax rate we think is going to come down quite a bit because of your value growth. I do want to just take a minute and point out that the tax rate here is not the same as what we prepared your notice to go in the paper. This is different than the rate that we put in the notice. And we do that for a very good reason. Because again, the values that we have right now from the county, they are estimates, and usually they're off by several percentage points. And so you'll recall with House Bill 3, your tax rate is linked to your value, right? And so for purposes of your notice, we want to be conservative because we don't want you to have to pay the extra expense of rerunning your notice, right? You have to run it in a paper. You have to do all these extra calculations. It takes time and energy from your finance team. And so we don't want to have to redo all this work if the rate we have to adopt later on ends up higher than what is in our notice. Okay, so that's why for purposes of the notice that's running now, that's been submitted to the paper, you're not going to see a rate of 7802. You're going to see a rate that's a little bit higher than that. Okay, and so that's the reason. It's because we only have those April prelims to work with now, and that's and we're going to avoid that position where you're having to do the work over twice. But you can see the impact here of some of those things that I talked about. Again, the main impact for new funding for y'all is those golden pennies. And those golden penny yield increases, that shows up on the tier 2 line, right? So you can see the increase in funding there. That's really the main driver of new funding for your district, as well as some marginal increases in school safety funding. Okay, because that's really in terms of budget increases, all like what we're talking about here. So I think that's my last slide. I'm open to answer any questions you all may have.
Do we have any questions from the board?
We have one.
Ms. Ryan?
Hey, sir, Ms. Ryan, I think what you just said was, so these numbers include all the things that have been passed and are non-contingent,
Yes, so
right?
everything on
Okay,
those,
so nothing that's contingent is planned in here if something changes, and nothing that didn't pass, but golden pennies, tax compression, school safety are all in here. I think that's what you just said.
that's absolutely correct. So everything on those first 3 slides that had a green check mark, right, that's sort of in the budget and has been passed, that has been reflected in these revenue projections.
Awesome, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Ms. Stanford?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Ms. Stanford. You said that the .78 is a conservative number on your part?
Well, what I said was the tax rate that we put in your notice, which I believe was, I think it was 8540, or I'm sorry, 8450. Yeah, 8450 is what we put in your notice for the M&A. That was a conservative number that we put in. Okay, the 7802 that you see in that presentation, that's using the April estimate that we got from the county. So, but for purposes of the notice, we ignore local compression because your values aren't final until July when they're certified. And that's when we would start to build in, we'd start to use that information for your tax rate adoption process.
So you don't expect it to be lower than that, it could be higher than that?
I would say usually the way it works with your county is the April values are sort of a high watermark, right, for your values, and then the protests throughout that the CAD is dealing with now sort of bring that down, and then the July values are usually lower than the April values as a result. And so again, the way tax compression works is the more growth you have, the more tax compression, right? So if you have less growth, right, from the prior year to the July values, then you're going to have less tax compression, right? So I would say the 7802, it could be higher than that, but it's certainly not going to be higher than the 8540
Yeah.
that we put in the notice. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, it's 8450. I'm sorry, 8450 is what we put in the notice.
8450, so 84.5 cents on our tax notice. This is that's from last year.
Any other questions? No? Well, Mr. Haney, thank you for the presentation. Very thorough. Much appreciated.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. And sorry I couldn't make it there in person this time, but next time I'll definitely be there. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic.
Next, we Oh, go ahead, sir.
Sure. I know that you're going to, but I do want to make a mention, just for the record. I skipped over the acknowledgement of citizens to be heard. We do not have any, so just want that to be on record. So, yes, introduce our next.
Yes, sir. Next, we have Mr. Westerman, Dwayne Westerman. With the talk about the taxes, we felt it necessary to bring in Mr. Westerman to talk about the INS portion of the tax rate, and with our current status, his recommendation on how we can move forward. So, Mr. Westerman?
Thank you, Dr. Fields.
Yes, sir.
And I guess I'll speak from here. That's all right. Again, I'm Dwayne Westerman with Samco Capital. We're financial advisor to the district and appreciate being here with you and the board tonight. So I'm going to try to go through this relatively quickly. Some of you that have been on the board, we did a defeasance last year. We're looking at this possibility again for this year. Okay, so after, as Josh mentioned with Mo Casey, we've also been going through the appraisal district numbers and the district's debt and trying to determine what potential actions the district could look at to manage the INS portion of the tax rate to maintain a stable INS level and to create capacity for the additional projects, additional bonds that we're going to issue going forward. We assume, and he just stated that we are expecting the M&O rate to be compressed again, maybe as much as the 7 cents that he addressed. So our review and analysis has shown us that because these are preliminary values, as he expressed, we've discounted those values that are under review to try to come up with a range of numbers that might impact the INS side. So what we've determined is that if we keep that INS rate at the 0.3654 level, we should come up with somewhere between a minimum of $700,000 to maybe a maximum of $3 million or more in INS revenues at that rate. And with that, we want to consider applying those funds towards paying debt off early, which would create debt interest cost savings and create future capacity as you issue the rest of the bonds authorized by the voters. This, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail this time. This is kind of our dashboard of the district's outstanding debt issues. The column in the middle that has some colored highlighted areas, that just tells us when certain issues are callable. Those are when the dates when those bonds can be repaid. That's what we look at when we're looking at these options. A quick rundown of our calculation of how we came up with the value. So under the scenario one on the kind of what we called our minimum level, we took the values not under review. We build in the factor for the frozen values. We get to $10 billion in property value for that. And then we take the values under review and we take into account frozen, and then we reduce them by some factor. In this case, we reduced them by 70%. And in the other scenario, reduced it only by 80%. It probably may not even be as much as that 20%. We may end up higher. We're just trying to be conservative right now. But using those two methods, we come up on the INS side with revenues of almost $52 million in scenario one and a little over $54 million in scenario two. So now we have lots of numbers, but we're really going to look at the top row, which is for fiscal year 2024. The first three columns are the principal, interest, and total debt service that the district has outstanding currently and due to be paid in 2024. That's $51,228,000. On the right-hand side, you'll see the value, and this is scenario one with the larger deduction on the potential values under review. If we use a 36.54 cent tax rate, we raise that revenue of $51,942,000. And I might mention, we calculate that revenue at 97% collections. You are normally at a higher level of collections. So we're still using conservative numbers here. So that $51,942,000 is greater than the $51,228,000 that the debt service that's currently scheduled to be paid, thus our difference of that $700,000 we talked about that we could potentially pay off early. This is the other scenario. Here with the 80% using 80% of those values, we get the difference of $3 million that could go towards an early redemption or early payment. Now, what I might mention and draw your attention to, and we'll look at this a little closer, the bonds that we look at are kind of targeting to pay off early come from the Series 2015 issue, and we'll look at that in a second. It comes from the last maturity in that, and that's in 2037. If you'll go down the line, here, it's right in here. You'll see that the debt service in 2037 drops. We've got this scheduled out currently running about $42 million. And that year it drops to $29 million in total principal and interest. That's because that's the year we paid some bonds off early last year. It was about a little over $13 million. That's also the year we would pull out of for this year, or what we're suggesting to pull out of for this year. So 2037. So it's creating savings right now for paying those bonds off early, but it's going to also create additional savings in the future because we're going to be able to make payments on new bonds in that year much shorter than it would have been otherwise. It would have had to have been extended out longer. So the savings we're talking about today are just for right now, but it's also going to create more help for us down the road. So savings-wise, this is from the 2015 issue. We pay off $700,000 out of that 2037 maturity. Those bonds have a coupon rate of 5%. It's going to save us about $35,000 a year, and then we get the $700,000 that's going to be paid off early, a net savings of a little over $400,000 in interest costs under this scenario. Next is where we were to pay off $3 million. Now we're getting $150,000 in savings annually, and then the $3 million paid off early out of 37. And so our net savings is close to $2 million. Just a quick summary here, and the next to the last line, projected savings achieved there, $437,000. We talked about $1,890,000 under the second. This is all preliminary right now. These are preliminary values, preliminary calculations, but just to give you an idea of what this looks like. So once, as we go forward, is with the rest of your budgeting process, and when you set the tax rate later in August, September, we'll get certified values. We'll look at this much more carefully, and we can determine the actual numbers and determine what we can do at that point in time. But our suggestion, as we've talked with the district administration, is that since you're going to get the compression, let's let that drop in the tax rate fall through to the taxpayers. We'll manage this tax rate at 36.54. We'll be able to do that. We said in the bond election that it was a potential 1 cent tax increase. We're not going to, it doesn't appear we're going to have to do that. And if we keep being able to do these steps along the way, I think we won't have to raise it at all in the process of issuing those bonds. I'll stop there and answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Ms. Ryan?
Okay, so you're saying, because we didn't implement the 1 cent bond November 2021, we didn't implement that because we had set our tax rate last year. So now we're talking about not doing that at all.
Correct.
And we can still pay off our highest interest rate credit card. And is that why we picked the 2015 one? Is that like I'll call it our highest interest rate credit card? In people speak, is that our highest kind of interest rate bond we have out, other than maybe the newest one?
A couple of factors. One, yes, it has one of the higher interest rates, and two, it's the one that we can pay off the soonest.
Okay.
Would us paying it off put us in a better position for when we sell our next bonds as
Yes.
well? So that would help as well. And we're going to come back with, what is it, 2 more sales or 3?
Currently, it's 2 more.
2 more sales.
This is the plan. That, as you all progress, we may change that, but that's the current plan.
Yes, sir.
And we'll get a chance to talk about this more again as we go when we get down to final numbers, but at least we get an overview here.
Yes, sir.
Are there any other questions from the board? No. very thorough, Mr. Westman.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and we do have, you all adopted a redemption defeasance resolution last year when we went through this process in August. If you decide to go forward on this, when we get to setting your tax rate, we would have you adopt the same redemption defeasance resolution before you set your tax rate, so you establish that intent to pay those bonds off early. We have a draft of that. If anyone needs to see that, John Hall prepared it. Yes, there you go, Ms. Eaton.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Westman. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Dr. Fields.
Yes, sir.
Just a point of clarity, I know we're going to go into the budget workshop portion of this, but apparently there's been some confusion with some thinking that this meeting would be aired live as a special meeting. I think we had concluded that budget workshops would not fall under that we would record them, but we, for the public, put a special board meeting as we're calling a special board meeting. So I'm wondering if we're going to have to talk about calling it a budget workshop for the sake of consistency, so folks won't assume, since it's listed as a special meeting, that it is going to be recorded.
Excellent point.
Just a thought so that we
Excellent
don't have
point.
confusion out there.
Yes, sir.
But at this point, let's go ahead and start the budget workshop.
Yes, sir. So this is the fourth of our budget workshops, and then we have another one coming up on the 22nd, but that one will be in conjunction with a board meeting, so I guess it would be posted as the board meeting portion. Our plan for this particular budget workshop is to cover our current budget updates, and then any planning that we have for the 23-24 school year, and the budget outlook that we see for our 23-24 school year. And then there were some previous concerns brought up in the last budget meeting that we wanted to go back and readdress a little bit as we go through. So the first thing will be Ms. Davis going into a cover of the general fund budget for this year, 22-23. So Ms. Davis?
Yes, sir, thank you.
Now, does everyone have a copy of this, or do we have it? Oh, perfect. We've got one posted this time. Thank you so much.
Were there any changes to what was in board book?
Yes, the one on the second to the last slide, I believe, we made some changes based on your recommendations yesterday for actual versus, you know what I'm saying,
Yeah, did we
projected.
Print that? I mean, like I brought my copy.
It's up here.
Oh, it's just up there, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And it looks like Ms. Holmes updated it on the board book, because I'm looking at the same thing right
Got
now.
it.
So it's been updated. Go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. So we're going to start off by looking at our, so we're going to start,
On.
okay, there we go. All right, so we're going to start by looking at our general fund budget currently for 22-23. On the left-hand side, you have the original budget that you all adopted. And so you can see, and on the right-hand side, you see our actual revenue that we've received thus far and our actual expenses. So when we take a look at our actual local revenue that we've received 121 million, so we're at about 109. And so you can account for that in our local tax collections, in addition to the additional ticket sales, investments, and tuitions that we received. So that is included in the local revenue. Then you take a look at our state revenue. We've received about 60% of that because the state pays in a certain payment schedule, so they will continue to pay through August. Then when you take a look at your total revenue, we are at 196, actually received 196.8. Then when you take a look at your expenses under salaries and benefits, so far we have 174.3. That does not include, because we ran this on June 2nd, it doesn't include the upcoming June monthly payroll as well as the upcoming June bi-monthly payroll. So we have two of those. So those are still pending and not included in here. And that's why you see that at an 81%.
Can you give the projected sum total of what that will be at the end of June?
Yes, it'll be about 16 million plus the accruals, probably about 3 more, so about 193.
Yes, ma'am.
more or less. 193 million is our forecast once we include our June payroll. And you'll see that in a future slide. So right now, I'm just showing you where the actuals are as of right now. So as of right now, we've expended 18.5 in contracted services and about 11.1 in our supplies for the school district. And in capital expenditures, you see the about 3.5. And you see that difference there because if you recall in our amendments, we bought some land, some chillers, and some amendments that we've brought to you throughout our regular board budget meetings. So that's why you see that there, that increase in the actual versus what we originally adopted at the beginning of the school year. So for a total of expenditures at 212.5. So that's the general fund budget. So we want to just go ahead and show you where our current budgets are before we talk about our proposed budget for next school year.
Do you mind if we go back through this just a little bit?
Please do.
So at the top, I just want to make sure that everybody understands what we're looking at. At the top where it says revenue, that's money that comes into the district. Where it says budgeted, that's what we predicted we were going to get. Where it says actual, that's what we actually got. So you can see under local revenue, we budgeted for 111 and 121 million came in. And then the other one would have been the salaries and benefits. We budgeted for 216 million and 174 came in. And then the obvious question would be, under salaries and benefits, why so much less than what we budgeted for? And we can say that there were 7 million worth of ESSER positions that were paid for out of the ESSER funds. In addition, there were vacancies that weren't filled throughout the course of the year. The other question would be, we thought that there was going to be 111 million come in, but there was 121 million that came in. How is that? I can tell you, I wasn't involved in the estimates of last year's budget, so I don't know what all rationale went into making that estimate. I can tell you that the way it was calculated, the year before last, I believe it was at 108 million that was calculated. But you can see, based on what Mo Casey put up, last year was calculated at 115. But I believe the estimate came from 108 million plus some other things from other 57 budget codes, and that's how they came up with the 111 million. But obviously, more than that came in, so we'll try and be a little bit more accurate as we move forward in this year. Does that make it easier to understand for everyone? Okay.
Now,
Yes, ma'am. I
Dr.
will not
Fields.
say it again. Yes, ma'am.
now I'm assuming that the percentage means that only 60% of that revenue has come in, like on the state revenue. And so I'm anticipating we'll see that additional 40%.
Yes, sir. So there's a particular payment schedule from the state, and it goes through August. So during the months that the state expects us to be collecting local taxes, they actually don't send any payouts throughout those months. So that's why it looks at, so actually we're right on par, and so we do expect the rest of it to come in. Yes.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, ma'am, please. Sorry.
So then we're taking a look at our child nutrition budget for this school year, where we're at. So local is basically the food that our students pay out. So those students that come pay a la carte. There was a budget at the beginning of this year for 411,000, and actually we have received 1.8 million. So that accounts for the difference. And so we were thinking about trying to think back why that was budgeted. What we could gather was that we were in COVID, and so if you recall all of those COVID payouts, it was very hard to predict exactly how many students would then come in and pay. And so actually, that's very good. We've done well. The state is a one-time payout, and so far we have received 127,000 from the state, and that's a one-time payout for the child nutrition. Then federal revenue for the child nutrition budget is all of our meal reimbursements. So we're on par there. So for a total of 19.5 million. Then we have our salaries. You can see that there was a budget there for 8 million. So far, we've expended 6.4, keeping in mind that there's vacancies in here that have not been filled, as well as our last payroll. for child nutrition, you're probably going to have that at the biweekly payroll coming out of there. So that's still pending. And then we have our contracted services and our supplies, and so for a total in the expenses of 17.3. One of the things that we do have is a corrective action plan, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we actually propose our budget for the next school year.
I'd only add that the key with child nutrition is that they don't have the same requirements that a district has when it comes to the fund balance. You can't keep building up money. They're going to come with this active spend plan where you need to spend down the money that you have in. And currently, the fund balance that we have for child nutrition is about 7.4 million, which is,
Yes, sir.
right, which is high. And we're going to have to spend that down. So we'll be working on it. But you can see it's because of the funds that came in. So this wouldn't be like with our regular fund balance where we're looking for making sure that we stay on top. We want to make sure that we kind of even that out in our projections throughout with child nutrition, because we're going to have to spend that money down. Yes, ma'am.
Part of it is going to be spent too over the summer with the summer meal program.
Definitely, but we're
I mean,
talking.
I know it won't be nowhere near 7 million, but, you know,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah. And I know that difference also is because the year prior to that and the year prior to that, you know, I mean, the kids weren't even
That's
here.
it, exactly.
So
That's it.
that kind of threw us off. So
Yes,
this
ma'am.
is really the first year that we've had to be able to get this straight.
Correct.
Because they had a full school year.
That's it. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
You're going to have to start serving steak, maybe?
No, ma'am.
Hey, we can have shrimp and turkey, what is it?
Lobster for breakfast.
Lobster, surf and turf night. I'll come.
All right, so on the next slide, on page 5, you're looking at our debt service budget for the year 22-23 that we're currently in. We have a local revenue of about 49.5. We did collect a little bit more than was budgeted for, but you're taking a look at some of those higher interest rates coming in. For the state revenue, we've received more. We've definitely received more than anticipated, 1.8 million, giving us a total revenue of 51.8, and our debt service is 49.1. So that's the current 3 budgets that we are in this current school year.
Oh, I was only going to say, when Mr. Westerman came in, he talked about the amount of debt service that we had in. Here you see that 51.8 million that he was talking about, and then he was saying going forward, he anticipates about 54.2. So this is the item that he was talking about. And keeping in mind that any funds earned in this area have to be spent on debt services. It's not like you can swap or shift or what you used to be able to do a long time ago. You have to use it for, exactly, yes, ma'am. They don't do that anymore.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
So what he briefed on was talking about next year's tax rate defeasance based on next year. But we came in way over this year. Did we not
And that's why-
defease last year? So what happens with this money if we didn't have a plan, like we're talking about having a plan for next year? Did we have a plan for 5 million extra this year and this is going to pay something off?
You go ahead.
Or does this just go back into like the debt service, just our savings account essentially?
We did have a defeasance this year of about $13 million, if
Yes,
I
ma'am.
recall correctly.
Okay, so
Yes.
this is all getting
This- yeah.
spent.
This year, and that's
Okay.
why we're proposing again a defeasance for next year so
Okay.
that we can maintain our current.
Okay, so we had a plan for this extra
Yes, ma'am.
5 going somewhere,
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's where we currently are at. Those are our actuals thus far. And so when we're talking about the budget process, as we mentioned before, we're in our 4th meeting right now. We go through the budget planning timeline that's remaining. On the 7th and the 14th of June, we published the notice that we shared with you via the Friday notes that was talking about the maximum tax rate that we could set. And we show the maximum because we haven't received our final values yet. And so that notice went out this Wednesday. It's going to go out again next Wednesday. Then on the 8th of June, which is where we're currently at, we are providing you with a budget update. And then on the 22nd, we anticipate our final public hearing and board meeting to approve the final budget and amendments, and then approve the 23-24 budget for next school year. But we approve it before we receive our certified values. And so that's why we're always talking about our predictions and our projected revenues and whatnot. But then we receive our actual certified values on July 25th. We do know that right now we are conducting ARB hearings, we're wrapping up our protests, and so then in August 1st is when we receive our certified value and information, then we provide to TEA that we received from our CAD. And then on August 6th, TEA provides the Tier 1 M&O tax rate based on the 2.5 limitation on value growth. And we probably will bring to you the ability to, on our agenda, for you to adopt the 2023 tax rate in August. We can do it in August or in September. We're proposing to bring it to you in August. And that would be the end of that process that we started back in February. So one of the next things that we listed on the agenda was usually every budget workshop, there are some concerns that are addressed. I know that there was a concern.
Ms. Davis, I'm
yes,
sorry.
sir.
I should ask a question now related. Can you go to the slide prior before you proceed? So the question I have is, there are some districts that have their fiscal year begin September 1, and obviously looking at this timeline again, I mean, I've asked that question in the past about Judson moving our fiscal year to September 1, because there's a lot, this happens every year, right? We're adopting a tax rate in August and.
Every other.
I'm sorry?
Every other year, every
other year.
legislative
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
So, not saying we're ready to do it, but at least the conversation about if it makes sense to position us a couple of years from now to be more aligned to address all these things. So we know exactly what those values will be, and I'm thinking maybe knowing that will give us a more concrete number rather than projecting how we've been doing. So I don't know that, but just keep that in the back of your mind as a possibility. Dr. Fields, Ceci.
I will. I'm sure we're both thinking the same thing, so you want to speak to, no, ma'am, go ahead.
Okay, there's certain pros and cons. If we wait to adopt into September, then that was okay. A lot of districts moved to July because more and more were starting the school earlier. So because we start, I mean, we bring our teachers back in August, right? And I don't remember, at least when I was younger, starting school
It
that
used to
early.
be after Labor Day.
It used to be after Labor Day. So back then, we had, it made sense for the fiscal years to start later. And as you've seen, more and more districts have moved over to July because a lot of the school districts now start in early August. You have all of the expenditures to be made and whatnot in preparing for football season. This is Texas. And so, anything else that you'd like to add?
Just to prepare your campus budget. If you're going to do that, and let's say that we don't give you your stuff until after you get here, starting the school year in August would be a push. So being able to receive the funding, knowing that it's going to be there when you show up and put the money where you need to spend it is a better deal for the people in the district than to start after they already start the school year. It would almost be difficult to budget that way and know that when you come back, you still have a certain amount. But even now, we tell the district that, hey, by May, you should be wrapping up your budget. So if we were to close the budget down in August and then, September, it's in the middle of the school year. So it would be difficult for them. This is the better way.
I know that Northside passes their budget September 1, so there's already a practice that this occurs.
Absolutely correct.
So just understanding that practice and what we could learn from that and see if it's applicable. Again, I do see advantages on both ends, honestly I do. But just when you see this, and if you want to really refine our budget process to be as accurate as possible, it's worth discussion, but we don't have to go further into it.
Understood.
I just
Yes,
thought
sir.
I'd bring it in. We'll talk about it later.
That's right. Thank you. And so One of the previous concerns addressed before is what if our property values increase? And here we said about 17%. How much more money is the district going to receive? Because we already know that our property values have increased, so how will that impact our budget and what we're receiving? And the state would pay Judson ISD less when the property taxes increase. Should all factors remain the same? Should our enrollment remain the same? Should our ADA remain the same? So you're kind of looking at a dollar for dollar there. And so you have a slide there that really shows, I think it's a good slide to show the funding dynamics of the state revenue versus local revenue. We have our basic allotment per student, but oftentimes there's that misperception that if we receive more from our local property taxes, that we would be able to bring more, and that's not necessarily the case.
Thank you for saying that too, Ms. Davis, because I think a lot of our constituents get a little confused by that, because I didn't realize that until I became a board member and went to SLI and went through the course specifically for this. If they say you can only have $50,000, this is just an example, to run your school, and you happen to get $10 more in taxes, property tax, from the property tax, then the state is going to take 10 because they're not going to let you have more than $50,000. So it took me a minute to wrap my head around that, because to me, it seems unfair. But to them, it seems fair. They just have a set amount, and they're not going to give us a penny more.
That was a great analogy.
I'm sorry, I'll jump in and disagree, because it's not exactly one for one, and Mo Casey's numbers do show us that. So like Mo Casey knows our property taxes are going to go up about $7 million next year, but we're not going to lose $7 million from the state next year, because there's a certain percentage that is protected that we are allowed to raise. Plus, like he talked about, our golden penny yield and copper penny for tier 2. We are allowed a level of increase before that one-for-one starts to kick in. So in some cases, it becomes one-for-one, but we're going up $7 million next year, but yet our state aid is still projected to go up $4 million.
I would say in terms of the pennies, first, in interest in sinking, the board has the ability to increase them. For M&O, if we were to increase that, you'd have to do like a TRE, a tax ratification election, take it back to the community, and they would have to vote on that. You don't have the authority as a board to just increase the M&O side of tax.
Some of it. Remember, the first 5 pennies are free. Only pennies 6, 7, and 8 need voter approval. So that's why he was talking about we have our 5 free pennies that we get generated yield on. Anything higher than that becomes then. So it is good to understand it's not just because it goes up 17% on property values, we're not getting 17% more.
But I think we're already there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd have to go back and check with the YouTube, but I think we're already at the 5 pennies. So anything more.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of the increase he shows and what we're getting next year is in those 5 pennies, and it's not getting even though our taxes are going up like $7 million, we're going to get $7 million more. He doesn't reflect a $7 million decrease in our state revenue, because it's not exactly one-for-one.
I would say that we need to watch it, but it's my understanding that at the end of the year, the state is going to come back and they're going to determine how much we received, and they're going to balance it out. And that's been my experience.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Something to look at, and I believe we already have those 5 pennies, so I don't know that we can actually go up.
Oh, not up. No, he's got the 5 pennies
Got it.
in here, and so he has it increasing our yield, how much we're bringing in. Those 5 pennies are already accounted for. That's why we don't see a $7 million decrease in our state revenue on his thing, even though we had a $7 million increase he's projecting in our property tax revenue. So it's slightly offset.
But we
get
haven't-
some free money.
We haven't really seen it yet because we're still at 60. And we haven't seen all of the, I mean, if we go back to the slide, correct?
Oh, yeah, for this year, we don't have the final
Okay,
thing. When
got it.
he plugs in what is supposed to happen into his scenario calculator for next year.
It's a model.
How the model of the
That's what he's thinking.
legislation is
Yes,
not a
ma'am.
one-for-one. The model of
Yeah.
legislation,
Right.
the legislation protects a certain portion of property tax increase. So, but it is something to be aware of so that the community doesn't think it's exactly 17% my property tax went up, therefore we're getting 17% more in property tax. That's not true.
That
No.
is not
Well,
true.
We can do a little
yes.
bit of
And there's
increase, but then
limited-
we'll see a little decrease, but.
And every
I-
models have their limitations, so.
Yeah, no, I'm glad he
just
did
wanted
these
to be able to-
projections, make
yeah.
everything a lot more clear. I'm glad they plugged all this into their fancy calculator.
Sounds good. So moving forward, we're going to just talk now about our proposed budget for next school year, and we're just showing you what our budget assumptions is. So we went through the timeline, we're in our fourth budget workshop. On the last board meeting, the board adopted our compensation plan, which included a 3% increase for our professional staff at the midpoint, a 4% increase at the midpoint for our auxiliary and professional staff. So those budget assumptions are in there when we're talking about our proposed budget for next school year. You have your average daily attendance, and then, of course, we're showing you our current rates for M&O tax and our INS tax. So given those budget assumptions and plugging those into our general fund, we have on slide 11, on the left-hand side, you see the adopted budget that the board adopted this current school year. And then the second column, you have your 2022-23 projected so what we project that we're going to end this current school year at. And then you have the current proposed budget, and then you see your net change there versus the projected versus to what we're proposing for next school year. So if we go line by line, we take a look at our local revenue. We had adopted this year 111. We're projecting ending at 122. And so we're proposing for next year's budget of similar 122.5. And so for a net change of about 0.5%. What
Ceci,
is
can I
not-
jump in on that one? Because we started to talk about that before the meeting. So that number lines up to Moat Casey's M&O is going to come, they're projecting will be 122.5 next year at the 78 cents.
Yes, ma'am.
At the compressed tax rate based on current legislation. So technically, if that line's supposed to be all of 57XX.
Correct.
Technically, there should be more money in there because we need to put our investment projection, football ticket sales, gifts, anything else we're projecting. So that 122, because kind of based on historical stuff, would probably be maybe 3 to 5 million more. I know that one's harder to project because we don't know what the investment earnings are, so you got to be super conservative on that. So that's probably going to be more in that 125, maybe 127 based on our historical data.
You're absolutely correct.
Okay, all right.
And I to make plain what Ms. Ryan's talking about is that under 57, it's more than just local. There's other things that are added in there. The athletic ticket sales last year, I think it was about a little bit more than 500,000. This year, we had prior year taxes and penalties and interest that came in. That's not something that you can really budget on, but we were able to go back and recover. That came in at about 500,000. We have Adventure Club in the district, and they bring in about $2 million, $1.9 million in a year. I wouldn't say that it's profitable, but they bring in a certain amount of money all year long. That goes towards it as well. And then you have investments. And then last year, I believe, or this year, I think we're at about $3 million. But you can't really determine what you're going to yield back on your investments. So to budget on that would be a misnomer as well. So in the past, what we've done is based on, remember I was saying earlier that they didn't take the 115 estimate that Moat Casey sent. We took the 108. If you were to add 3 million of what we just talked about, half of that, it comes out to the 111, and that's how they came up with the $111 million estimate that they had last year. So to your point, Moat Casey has come back this year and said that they anticipate that because we had 122 this year that actually came in, I would argue that there's certain things that happened this year that we may not have happen next year. So I think that that's not a conservative estimate. I think it's an aggressive one. But they're saying 122.5, so that's what we went with. Now, we could do the same thing that they did last year and take half of what those earnings are to the tune of about $3 million, add that on, and then we come up with Ms. Ryan's recommendation of the possibly 125 range. So we would be more than happy to do that. It's just that as we go through this next year, we want to make sure that we don't get overly aggressive in what we assume may come back to the district, because nobody anticipated these interest rates this year, you know. And we've got money that's added into this 122 that was based on those interest rates. Right. And nobody anticipated us being able to get back taxes from people that didn't pay their taxes before, and collect taxes and penalties and fees on them not paying them before. So we got it this year. That's what got us to the 122. That's what they said. You're absolutely correct. We should add on those other 57 subcategories, and that would take us about $3 million more, and then that would put $3 million more back into the budget. But actually budgeting that out is what I'm not.
No, I think it's more about the board understanding. When you see a $25 million deficit budget, it's like, oh my gosh, we just got hit by a truck. We can't sustain $25 million. Well, you have to remember that bottom line is not the real bottom line. That's the ultra conservative, and that we're not adding these things in, and there's so many things that we are not putting in because they're kind of squishy and unknown. So when we look at bottom line numbers, we have to remember that that's the most dangerous scenario. That's the most dangerous financially scenario. All the wheels fall off the bus. This is what we end up at versus where we are most likely going to end on the budget. So most likely we're going to end more than 122. Does it mean you have to add it to the budget line right now? No, but people just have to remember that there is more money out there than what is going to be reflected, necessarily in the numbers. So 25 million doesn't necessarily mean 25 million.
No, I hear what you're saying. I would say that it was added last year because we can calculate how we got from 108 to 111. So it was considered. This year we did not, because we really looked at late payments coming in and penalties and interest to the tunes of millions that we were like, okay, can we really depend on this?
Does Lineberger give us an estimate each year, of what they think they're going to collect?
Well, they tell us.
Do they ballpark it?
They always say 98%.
No, I mean delinquent stuff. Don't they collect our delinquent? Or no?
They don't know what they're going to collect on delinquent.
Okay, I wasn't sure if they do their own internal projections of, y'all have 5 million outstanding, maybe we can get 10% of that back next year.
This year was an aberration of what came in. Matter of fact, we were shocked to see it. Okay. And then to get the penalties and interest on it as well, we were like, wow.
Well, some of it is COVID. We couldn't collect things.
Exactly.
People couldn't foreclose on houses,
Yes,
and we
ma'am.
couldn't, Bear County wasn't doing it. So really, it was years' worth now that all got squished into this year, and yeah.
But we'll make an adjustment on that, and we can change the 122.5 that we saw for Mo Casey, add in half of the estimate of what we just went over to the tune of about $3 million, and then we'll we'll refine this estimate as we move.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me interject here for the sake of this discussion. For my colleagues that may feel that Ms. Ryan has a lot of more intel, she loves budgets, we all know that, but she's had a little more access to this as she's trying to understand the budget. And so in trying to be proactive, I do want these type of information sessions available to the entire board, because some of the detail that was provided was pretty helpful for Ms. Ryan to understand some of what's happening. But I also want the board to know that I also expect next year when we do program reviews and we're looking at local revenue, we'll know exactly where all the local revenue is coming from and what the actuals are from previous year. We didn't have the benefit of that type of detail this year, so we're looking at it in general, but I certainly want to now get it forward, and Dr. Fields, you and I have been to those program reviews of the past that provide that detail for the board, so that when Ms. Ryan is talking about that detail and needing that, the whole board will have that information so that we can evaluate, too, the variables of all these revenue streams. I don't think we're there. We've been pretty much on that higher evaluation, but for the board to get really a better understanding, as I fear, we're coming into a situation where we're really going to have to tighten our belt, and we need to understand all of the intricacies of budgets. And it's, I'm not an alarmist, but I do feel it's coming, and we need to be ready for it. So
I would say, Mr. Macias, that you are correct. I would also say that it's our plan through the course of next year that we stop and explain in detail what's going on month by month. That way, when we get to this process at the end, we're not trying to go back and rehash everything, because we will have followed it throughout the instructional year. And we'll be
I think
better.
that's a very good course of
Yes.
action for the board to be aware. I mean, that is one of our cardinal anchors.
Responsibilities of the board.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
And so, anyway, but just again, just to put that back out there. Thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay.
You were at state revenue.
Thank you.
Oh, right. What'd I do?
And so for expenditures, you're looking at thank you, for the salaries and benefits. Our adopted budget was 216.3. We're projecting ending at 193. That's the actual total salary payout for the positions that we have, so that doesn't include the vacancies in there. So once we start thinking about our vacancies, once we start thinking about the salary, we start thinking about the substitutes that we have paid, the overtime that we have paid, the extra duty that we have paid, and including benefits, we are proposing a budget for next year of 210 million, and that accounts for the difference between your projected to your budget for a change of a 9% increase. That salary also accounts for the 3% and the 4% that was already passed in the last compensation plan. So our operating costs, we started an adopted budget of 42.3. We are projecting ending the year at about 46.5, and that's due to some of those amendments that we just talked about earlier. And so then we are projecting a budget for next year back to about 42.5 million. And then that gives us a total for our projection for this current school year, 22-23 projected. We're projecting ending at 239. And so when you take a look at that, if you go all the way to the total revenue for projected actual, we have a revenue of 231.5 and a total expenditure of 239. So if you compare that to our adopted budget, where this year the board adopted a budget at a deficit of 24.9, almost 25 million. Now that we are getting closer, and that's again through this budget process, each time that we start, we're able to get closer and closer and give you better numbers. We're now projecting a deficit of about 7.9. Now, once you account for everything that I mentioned earlier, the 3%, the 4% increase, being able to take some of those ESSER supplanted salaries back in here, being able to take into account all of our benefits would increase too, because now we're increasing the salaries, and you're talking about all of that put in together. We go back up to next year, 223, 224, we are proposing a budget with a deficit of 16.7. So we're looking at an unassigned fund balance at the June of 2022 at 122, but we are projecting the net revenue versus expenditure now at 8 million or 7.9 versus what we had predicted before. So we would end on 2023 with an unassigned fund balance of 116, which gives you that net revenue of 16.6 or almost 17 million, leaving us with a projected unassigned balance at the end of next school year, June 2024, of about 98. Now, throughout the school year, we will bring the amendment in resolution for the general fund incentives to show the need of why we're going to be taking that out of fund balance for our general fund for the incentives that we propose within the compensation plan. So that would be right before we pay our next incentive, which would be in September. We'll bring it in.
Correct. So one of the other things that Ms. Ryan had asked was, did our projections include, when we talked about the incentive pay, we said that that would come from ESSER in the winter and then from the general fund in the spring? And did this include, this estimate include that coming out of the general fund? But rather than budget for it, we would like to do a resolution where it shows that, because anytime you take money out of the general fund and then give it to the employees, it has to show the educational benefit. So it would be easier for us to put in a resolution where it's showing an educational benefit in whichever way we do it for the people who are receiving that incentive. And we just not include it as part of the budget, if that makes sense.
So does that mean that, are you saying that more has to come out of this number, so we'll have a lower projected unassigned fund balance?
Correct. We will do a resolution to account for what we had said in passing the comp plan. We talked about incentives where we said most of those would come from ESSER funds during the winter. And then we would take from the fund balance, the general fund, for the summer incentives. And those come out to about seven, go ahead.
About 7.2 million, and those would include the, some we were going to take from ESSER and some we were going to take from the general fund balance. So that would include the spring incentive for our non-teachers next year to the tune of about 1.9 million. And then the attendance incentive for the auxiliary and paraprofessionals, the attendance incentive that's going to be paid out quarterly with a first payout in September. So that's why we would bring the resolution to you before that for another 1.9 million. And then our DOI incentive of 100,000 and our hard to fill incentive that we passed for our police, for special ed, for our bus drivers, for sped paras and teachers. That is about 200,000. And then our spring teacher step incentives at 3.1 million. The winter ones we're going to take out of ESSER because we want to make sure we expend all that money sooner than later. And so in order to do that and to show the need, we would bring a resolution to you probably in August.
I would say that, again, this is something that we refine as we work through it. If there's more funding left over in ESSER than what we anticipate, and we believe that there will be because we have positions that are budgeted for in the ESSER account that we may not refill. And if those add up to a certain amount of money, then what we will do is add those funds towards even the spring payout before we would go into the general fund. But to pay those incentives from the general fund, we need to do a resolution that speaks to the educational benefit of doing so. Otherwise, it comes back as gifting of public funds, which we cannot do.
So basically, you're expecting this number to be closer to 91? Did
Oh,
you
I
say
turned the page
it's like 7.2 million?
Yes, 98 minus 70.2. But remember this, that the general fund incentive, that's a one-time hit because it's an incentive, right? So that's this
Not
here,
correct.
yeah,
Right.
correct.
It
won't
wouldn't be there the
recurring.
following year.
And that's why we would bring it through a resolution and all of that. So that's just one time because we don't know how we would be structuring incentives moving forward based on what the board decides.
Okay. How much are we required to have? What is the floor?
The floor is 3 months for operation, which for us is about 65 million. Yeah.
Correct. And again, that's a projected, an additional 7 million out. If there were funds left over from the ESSER, because we're going to spend those first before we go into the general fund, that could come back. Yes, ma'am.
Use it all up.
We gotta spend that money.
Yes, ma'am. All right, so on the next page.
Hold
Oh,
on,
yes.
sorry, I was just still thinking. hold on. So now so we're hiding 7 million out of here is what you're telling me, because I'm sorry.
That was all you,
Nothing's
Ms. Ryan.
currently
And
very-
just a point of order, if there's questions, please raise your hand so I can recognize you, so in case there are other board members that have their hand up. So, Ms. Ryan,
If
go
there was
ahead.
someone else with their hand up, I will yield.
No, go right ahead, Ms. Ryan.
Okay, sorry. So essentially, this 210 does not reflect what was passed at the last board meeting, because now there's 7 million missing out of there.
It reflects what would be recurring. The incentive is only a one-time piece. And so because of the reasons that were mentioned before, we want to make sure that nobody misinterprets that as a gift because it's a one-time incentive. We are required to bring a board resolution for that before we pay that out. So that would be separate. It was definitely shared what all of the incentives would cost in our last budget meeting
And where they would come from.
and where they
Again,
would,
no.
yes, so it,
Because I think we thought when those of us who were reading this read ahead of time, and we had talked about the fact y'all had redone all the numbers and streamlined and refined everything, that this number had dropped significantly because of refinement, not because we just took $7 million out of there. So that changes the numbers a lot in terms of what we do. Now, and again, like we talked about too, is that our ESSER plan, we're not going to have as many pre-Kers show up as we think we have budgeted for, and we're not going to have as many teachers show up as we have budgeted for either.
But we have to budget for them.
Correct. And so, again, we're budgeting now for most dangerous financially, best for our district, great if everybody shows up. But in reality, they are not. So, it looks like we have, even if I add 7 back, now I have to do math, 17 plus 7. You see, now we're back up to 24 million is the number you are showing.
24 million, I don't understand, man.
Because right now, you're showing as a
Oh, okay.
$16.6 million deficit budget, but in reality, that could be 23 if we don't have leftover ESSER to pay some of it. If you do a $7.1 million resolution, now this becomes a budget amendment for another $7 million.
Correct, a one-time process through the fund balance. But we explained that. We said that we would take the winter incentive
Oh,
and
no.
pay for it out of ESSER, and then we would take the spring and pay for it out of the general fund or the fund balance.
Yes, no, I'm tracking, yeah, no, the slides were clear on where the money was coming from, but it wasn't clear on our read-aheads that had changed. So when we saw 210 in here, we thought
What
y'all had,
changed?
that the amount for salary for next year had gone down.
Again, we're not counting these as salary. It's important that we don't say that it's a salary because we don't want it to be a part of the budgeting process. We're trying to say that it's an incentive. It's a one-time. And when you do something like that, you have to pass the resolution because it could come across as gifting of public funds. And we have to be careful to say, this is the educational benefit of giving that, and then we do the board resolution, and then we take that amount out of and we've done the same thing even when it comes to the purchase of land. We've come back and done a board resolution to say this is what we're going to do.
So when we briefed it at the last board meeting, though, it was in there,
Got it?
right? Is that what you're saying, though? It was in there. We did put it
No.
as salary and benefits, or it wasn't?
It was not. That part was not included. The part coming out of the general fund for the second stipend was never included.
It was never included in
Yes,
there?
ma'am.
Okay,
That's
all
why
right.
we're saying now we'll probably have to take that out as well, but we'll do that through a board resolution.
Okay.
And we'll do it quickly. That way we can get it, and we'll show the educational benefit for auxiliary, for professionals, for teachers and so on, just to make sure that it's out there. But I want to be transparent in that, like you, I know that there's going to be ESSER funds that we can use to do that. And when that number comes back lower than 7 million, it's because we were able to get the money from the ESSER account.
Okay, all right,
Yes, ma'am.
so now I'm back to, so I can go off my old numbers and what I had written down. So essentially where I'd been thinking I was going to go tonight was, we've done a lot of refinement, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate, I know this is a new team putting this together, new board members, new superintendent, new director of, or I'm sorry, deputy of business, whatever your title is. I'm going to call you deputy of business stuff because that's what you're doing right now. And then new CFO and new director. And I know y'all have spent nonstop time digging into all of these numbers until the wee hours to do that. And so I'm excited that we have refined this enough that we were at 221 million as our salary expenditure, and we have refined those numbers enough to now drop that $11 million
Yes,
since our last board meeting, when we approved the 3 and the 4%. You know, we did that thinking our expenditures were going to be 221. Well, now it turns out our expenditures are only going to be 210. Our revenue projections have gone up thanks to Mo Casey and their estimates. Now we're bringing in more money than what we had briefed at the May meeting. And when I look at historical data and I see that last summer, you know, 5 of the 7 board members are still here, approved a $25 million deficit budget, right? And then had $5 million in budget amendments. And everybody was okay with that, understanding that that was always worst case budgeting and that reality was always going to be far less than that. So the risk level was pretty low. And then in May, again, the presentation was a $25 million deficit budget plus another $7 million in incentives. And again, the board was okay and passed another $25 million deficit budget. So if we have now gone and found $11 million more dollars since that last board meeting, which is what these numbers look like we have now found between revenue and cutting of expenditures, you know, the risk hasn't changed. Nothing in our scenario has changed. So at what point is COA 5 on the table? Because we told everyone we were going to go back and look for the rest of the pennies. We promised that to everybody who was watching. So if we found 11 million more pennies, what stops us from putting together that COA 5 that is, you know, something potentially like bringing those teachers, and by teachers I mean the entire teacher pay scale, just for sake of clarity, all the nurses, librarians, everybody who's on there. What is to stop us from bringing that from the 3% up to the 5%? That would be, you know, somewhere around $3.5 million more dollars. What's to stop us from a COA 5 that brings the paras and auxiliaries from 4 up to 5? Because if I'm doing my kind of stubby pencil math, doing something like that to bring all of them up to about a 5 is about $4 to $5 million. And if we just found 11, and everybody was good at last meeting being 25 million deficit, and everybody was good a year ago with a $25 million deficit, and we just found 11 million, why are we not willing to now use 5 of that to, you know, maximize? Because again, the last thing the community wants is us putting more money back into fund reserve. And as, you know, the discussion went down that rabbit hole yesterday, that 8 million deficit for this year is probably not going to turn out to be 8 million deficit for this year. It probably will look a little prettier than that in the end and maybe not take any money out. And the community does not want any more money put back into fund reserve. They're not. They overwhelmingly are saying, give it to the teachers and the staff or give it back to the taxpayers. So we need a plan to start using that money because it's more than a safety cushion. It's just too much.
That was a lot. I would say first, you said to the public, and the board said that we were going to go back and try and refine this and find every penny that we could. My goal has always been to get to 0, not to continue a deficit budget. In the past, Judson doesn't run, and we wouldn't run our households that way and say that we're going to continue to do a budget where we dip into our savings until the savings is gone. We would try and create a budget where we zero out and we spend what we know is going to come in. We're not waiting until the process of next year to get that done. We're doing it right now, even through this budget cycle. And when we find things, we're bringing them back. I would ask that we go through next year and do a TASB survey before we start saying what we need to increase, what we need to take away, and what we don't need to have before we just start continuing to raise. In addition, we've passed the comp plan for next year, and we're moving forward with getting that done. But now to come back and say, because we're refining this and we're making more conservative estimates based on what we see that we spent this year versus what we thought we were going to spend, I would not recommend that we now come back and continue to increase, because every time we do that, it's a recurring cost. And we're entering into a period where we may not be able to continue that. And once we do, there are serious decisions that are going to have to be made. And when we find these funds, we're coming back, negative 7.9 is still a hit to the fund balance of $7.9 million. And we're, to your point, it may not come back that way, but we can't budget and give increases based on what may not happen. I'd rather we really know. And what we're trying to do now is sharpen our pencils, find out where we could have made better estimates as we go forward. And the people that you see here were not part of those estimates last year. So we're trying to make better estimates as we move forward and get as close to that number as we can. But I would not recommend to the board or as a district that we continue to operate in a deficit budget. Yes, sir.
Ms. Eaton, I want to recognize her. She has a comment.
You know, I know when we discussed the budget, when we were going through it, we also made a decision to bring in a consultant to go through our pay scale. And the agreement was, because we need to get it straight. The last administration messed it up. We need to get it straight. And we already made that decision. So the budget that we have tentatively approved is good. And we can make changes after we get the audit done. We can't keep blindly trying to adjust this without knowing if we're really on track. And we talked about that.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple of comments too. I've been kind of yielding a little bit.
Yes, sir.
But again, Dr. Fields and your team, please continue providing your recommendation. That is your job as a staff, to give us all the data that you can. I mean, our job as board is to create that vision and evaluate, and so we'll continue to do that. And Ms. Ryan, I know that you are wanting to put on the table, so when the right time comes, you can put the motion on the table for the increases. I meant it when I said if we find more money, I would be receptive to evaluating any increases in our compensation plan. So I still mean that, if it makes sense. So, but I am conservative. I do know that we would like to be close to a zero balanced budget. That would be the ideal situation. And you did allude, Ms. Ryan, that 5 of us were here, that we adopted a $25 million budget. We don't always want to adopt a $25 million budget. That's not our goal to do that. We were comfortable last year in the fact that we needed to for strategic purposes. What we haven't heard...
And I don't want you to lose your train of thought.
Go right ahead.
What also we had was the ESSER funds to supplement in a capacity as well. Those funds are going away. And this,
Bring back $7 million.
and we're going to have to bring back $7 million of those positions as well. So we knew there was cushion.
Understood.
Yes.
So the thing that I want noted is that there are still other areas, as Ms. Eaton, I was going to make the mention of that she did, where we have compensation adjustments that need to be made, and they're at a major tune of millions potentially that will have to come back. Yes. So we're going to have to adopt resolutions to make those adjustments. So that's one area that still is coming forward. In addition to future expenditures, we still have to go back to the comp plan because there's still some adjustments that may need to be amended. And I'll give you one really concrete example. Academic coaches, not being aligned. I've been hearing some feedback from employees that academic coaches have no incentive to take an AP position because they'll be paid less now. So we've discovered that potential exists. So we need to talk about making some adjustments in our compensation plan to adjust that, and I would like to do that before we pass the full budget. I'll stop because I do want other input. So Ms. Rodriguez, go ahead, please.
I would not support making an adjustment here, an adjustment there before we do a comprehensive audit, because we're going to miss things. We are inevitably going to miss things. And so I think it is very, very important. Like, we've passed the compensation plan. I personally, and like, don't get me wrong, I support paying teachers more. That is very important. But I think that we have approved a compensation plan. And now we're talking about the budget, the rest of the budget. And I think we need to wait for any further talk about the compensation plan until we have the audit that we're planning, which is happening soon, correct, sir? Like, when is that scheduled?
I believe it is scheduled for July.
Correct. And we would have the ability to make changes at that time, correct? It's not like we'd have to wait for next year's budget cycle.
Depending on what we receive from TASB in order to make that scale less compressed and whatnot, we would bring back to you what that cost would be.
Yes.
Because now you're talking
Correct.
about district-wide
Right.
changes. So
Yeah.
that would come at an additional cost, and then we would bring back to you those recommendations and the approximate.
And I didn't mean that, like, TASB would then enact, like, okay, now,
wish.
they would make recommendations.
Yes.
But we have a mechanism to adjust the compensation plan off of our budget cycle,
Correct.
correct?
ma'am.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
And I know historically that, I know one year, the year I wasn't on the board, Ms. Canoyer had mentioned bringing in some additional support for stipends, right, during the fall, where there was some adjustments made, which I thought was responsive, right, responding to the community. But I will add and be very clear, we have not passed the whole budget. The compensation plan is still on the table. We did make a commitment to reevaluate it. We can amend the compensation plan, which I intend to do so when we have our next meeting, to address some of these obvious questions that we have. There's no reason we have to wait if we know that academic coaches are not going to be seeking positions as APs. It just doesn't make sense. So where we know we need to make adjustments, we should. We've already identified them. And of course, there are other elements of the comp plan that I'm concerned about, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But I do want the board to know that amendments can be made up until we pass the whole budget, and that is within our purview to do that. So, we're not locked in. So I just want that to be clear too. Yes, Ms. Rodriguez.
Who is aware of these? The positions that you're talking about, because I wasn't aware until you said that. And so I'm curious if you're talking about, like, you're aware, the administration is aware.
I've had communications with Dr. Fields regarding the academic coaches and trainers, and I'm not the only one that's aware of that, so that's why I say we're aware of that. And plus, I said it right now, academic coaches, so we are aware of that. And so as a board member, as any board member, when we go through the comp plan to pass this budget, we can pull things. And so I have my own concerns about some of the compensation plan. I plan to bring them up. But when I said we are aware, I'm talking about academic coaches and trainers. So does that answer the question, Ms. Rodriguez?
It does, but it doesn't
Okay.
make me any more comfortable with what you're proposing about, like, doing a change here and a change there on the compensation plan. I'll just name that and
Sure.
leave it at that, because I'm ready to move on, but I also am fine if people have questions.
Ms. Eaton?
I just want to say, and this, I'm done with this. We are not hiding money. It would not benefit us as a district to hide money. For what purpose? I want to give our teachers and employees as much money as possible, but I want to stay within the confines and of what we are allowed to do. And that's why I believe in the last budget meeting, I mentioned about the different pots of money and what pot we can pull payroll out of. I mean, because what is our percentage at right now, Ms., I'm sorry.
Davis.
Ms. Davis?
93.
Because we're way
92.
over as far as salaries, we're at what, 89% or something like that?
We are a little bit higher. Normally, it should be about 80. We're about 92, 93%.
Okay. I'm just trying to make sure that we're being cautious, because we discussed the fact that those positions that were created and paid for out of ESSER funds, that they have to now be moved back over, which now means that's coming out of the general fund. We can't tell those people, oh, ESSER funds ran out, so now you don't have a job. So we have to be conservative and keep all that in mind as well. But I don't want to make any changes right now until we get the audit, because I want everybody to get the right pay, from the bus drivers to our custodians, our cafeteria work. I want everybody to get the right pay. And that was the reason we decided to bring somebody in to do the audit. So I just want to say that.
Well, I appreciate that. Dr. Fields?
Oh, Dr. Toppin, please. Okay, gotcha. Oh.
Sorry, Ms. Canoy.
Yes. I just want to make a clarification, if I may, Mr. President.
Sure. That's why I looked at Dr. Fields.
Yes.
All right.
Go
I
ahead.
work with these people every day, so I just want to make a quick clarification. We have academic trainers, and we have academic coaches and academic deans. The academic trainers are on teacher pay with extra days, because their primary role is that they are there to coach teachers, and they do not have to have an administrative certification. Your academic deans, which are at your high school level, and your academic coaches, which are at your elementary and your middle school and your high school level. Your academic coaches, which are your elementary and middle school, and your academic deans at your high school, have to have an administrative certification in order for them to accept that job. And so the roles of those individuals, those three different groups of people, are very different, which is why the academic trainers just stay on teacher pay and they get extra days, whereas your academic deans and your academic coaches are on the pay scale of assistant principals.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of want to make that clarification, because we have them at different levels, people kind of get them confused, exactly what their role is and how they are paid and where they are on our pay scale. So one's on teacher pay, the other one's on administrative.
So another component to think about when you think about the delineation of those roles, there are individuals who academic trainer is where they want to be. They're not interested in getting their admin certification. They're not interested in one day doing T-tests or ARD facilitator. They're not interested in that piece. They are interested in just that academic trainer role, right? The one-on-one, hands-on with teachers in the classroom. So there's that delineation there, right? For those individuals who are interested in transitioning from academic trainer to academic coach or academic dean, there's a pipeline for them to do that. So I think it's dangerous to say, some of these guys are feeling like they don't have the opportunity to go from one position to the next. It's because it requires an additional degree.
And I'll be precise, and I know Ms. Canoy had the floor, so I'll yield. Ms. Canoy, you can provide input.
Right, so I think probably the same person who called you called me. And it's one person who has over 20 years of experience, is an academic trainer, and has been spoken to about becoming an AP. Normally, when you're on the AP track, you do it before 20 years because you're on that pay scale, you're up pretty high. And when you start over at the bottom, roughly, of the admin pay scale, it's less money. It's fact of life. It's that way anywhere. It's the same, boom. So I spoke to that person. That person is not interested in doing everything, as you said, has been pushed by somebody to step up because that position might become available. So be that as it may, I don't think we need to be changing that because of one person. Okay, so there's that. Number two, I want to talk about some of the other things that have been bothering me. One, when we do our TASB survey,
ma'am.
can we look at stipends also?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, especially,
That's part.
I want to look at athletic stipends, because I'm hearing, and fine art stipends, because I'm hearing from some people that the stipends pay at other districts is so much more that it offsets the raises and incentives that we have. So if we can take that and look at, what are we doing there? I'm also very concerned about transportation.
Yes.
And I would like a little bit of talk about how the charter buses have affected us, and do we have a good plan going forward? Are we still going to continue with that? Have we budgeted accurately for that? What did it look like? How did it shake out from from what we thought it was going to be to what it is now? So that's all something that is truly going to affect money. There's a bunch of money, a couple million, I'm sure, that we're looking at for that. And I had something else. Sorry, look at my notes real quick. The Wagner track. I know that we're going to be working on that. It's not something that finishes up over the summer.
No, ma'am.
Right. So are we busing those kids somewhere else to practice during the year? And if we are, do we have the buses available? Is that built into our budgeting and all that kind of stuff too? So those are things that have been popping in my mind as people have reached out to me with concerns. So that's why I'm bringing that up.
Thank you.
Well, I would put it back on in your hands, Dr. Fields.
Yes, sir.
So you have, okay, so then let me say my part just to close the part that I was talking about in terms of the academic coaches and trainers. I've talked to more than one person, but the idea is still this. If you look at the situation that I just mentioned about academic coaches, and you feel there's no need to adjust it and it's not a barrier for them to seek positions as an AP or any other administrator, then I would be fine. But you need to take a look at that, because what it seems to me is that we are not making enough incentive for an academic coach to pursue other positions as an AP or anything, because they'll be paid less. If that paradigm exists, that's where my concern is. We want to make sure that we are opening the door to promote from within. And if we're not promoting from within, then that's counter to one of our core beliefs to provide opportunity from our own employees for internal positions. So I'll have you look at that again, just to make sure, because that's sort of what I would motion to change.
Yes, sir.
But you'll have to give me your intel on that.
Yes, sir.
And of course, I'll give Ms. Stanford, and I'll give Ms. Ryan. Yes, Ms. Stanford.
First of all, I'm not really clear that we had actually passed the entire compensation plan. There's been some confusion about that. But I do have to share some feedback I've had from the community. And optics are important, and how people perceive things are important. So I think we need to keep that in mind. And the compensation plan that we so far are discussing includes additional income to the highest tier positions. So people in the community see that, teachers see that, and take exception to that. They feel that they're being held back in their raises while we're rewarding our highest paid people, such that not only do they get a raise, but they get additional days, which equates to roughly a 7.7% increase in income. And that has been expressed to me. I think we need to acknowledge that. I don't know how we address it, but it just comes across as an unfair action on our part. And I just have to express that, because that has been stated to me from several people.
Thank you. I'll let Ms. Ryan.
Yes, a couple of things as we had gone around the table. I think we have to be careful about the word deficit budget, and because we haven't actually run a deficit actual. For 5 straight years, we have put money back in fund reserve. We have never, in the last 5 years, taken money out of our reserve balance. Even though every budget looked like a deficit budget, just to be clear, it has never turned out to be a deficit in the actual 5 straight years. So there's no continuing of dipping into the funds, because we haven't had to in over 5 years. I also caution us to be careful when we say 90% of our budget is salary, because probably the more important line to look at is how much of our budget is instruction actually teaching children in a classroom. Because last time I did the numbers about a month ago, we were at about 58% of our budget was spent on instruction, and that was the lowest of the 5 districts that surround us. Everyone else was spending more money on kids. And that goes back to the streamlining that really needs to occur in the next year. For all this money for salaries, that is not direct instruction type salaries, and a lot of streamlining, because we need to get our percentage of money spent directly with the kids.
I agree.
That needs to grow.
I agree.
So 90% makes it sound like we're spending a lot of money on human capital people, but those are not human capital teacher people in classrooms, always. Extra days academic trainer. By the way, they don't have them extra days in this document, which I've never seen until 36 hours ago. So again, if we pass this, I've never seen it. It was emailed to me 36 hours ago. It was not on the dais at the last board meeting. I never saw a draft of it. So if we pass this, great. I don't think Laura and I knew we passed it. I don't think we knew that's what the motion was, but I also started to try to go through here, and we're talking about, not wanting to make a bunch of adjustments to this till we get the TASB survey. But when I did side by side, there's 50 different changes in here where we piecemealed different positions, different changes. We added stipends. So to say we're all waiting and we don't want to piecemeal it, looking from the last year to this year, that's apparently what we approved, was a piecemealing of 50 different changes instead of waiting on TASB. And I haven't finished going through the whole thing, and I will. And then, if I have recommendations, but again, neither of us had seen this, so if we passed this last board meeting, we didn't know it, hadn't seen a copy.
Yeah, and I'm going to yield it to Ms. King, but I will just add, since you've talked about the comp plan, just to kind of close that on my end. Regardless of the semantics, we still have the ability to amend a compensation plan legally, and the intent is I'm going to put a motion on the floor to amend the compensation plan, not the whole thing, but parts of it. So, and that's all I'll say about it right now. Ms. King?
So I know that you guys said there's an audit in July. So how comprehensive is that? What is that going to cover?
Again, we've put in to have that done. I originally proposed this, I think it was back in February, and we said that we were going to try and get TASB. TASB said that they weren't going to be available. Then we said we were going to go with Gibson. Okay. And then Gibson was saying they didn't know if they would have the time to get it done. So then we went back to TASB, and TASB said that they would be available in July. We have yet to sit down and go through the contract and say exactly how comprehensive the audit will be. But I can tell you it's going to take time. It's not something that can come in, they just take a snapshot look in a day, and then they come back and say, here's our feedback. You guys need to increase your recurring budget 3.5 million, and this is what you need to do. We've done this in the past. It takes a while to get it done. To Mrs. Kenoyer's credit, she said these are the things that we need to make sure that we get looked at. We'll make sure that we already had stipends in there, as well as.
I figured you did. I just wanted to.
Right.
Just in case.
But I don't want to give the impression that they're going to come down here in July and in August we're going to know exactly what to do. That's not the case. This takes time. It takes months for them to look at everything and then give us feedback. But I agree. There's some things that we need to correct. But doing onesie, twosie, we did the best that we could going forward on this particular comp plan when we made the proposal. In addition, I would say that on the 18th of April, we sat here and went through it line by line with the board, page by page on every change. And then at the end, we made the recommendation in the board meeting, and we said we were going to make the recommendation in the board meeting. So I don't want to give the impression that, now, you're right. During this time, it's our job to make recommendations. You let us know what you want to do, and we will do the best that we can to make sure that that's the successful way to move forward. But to the point of the top tier people, the people sitting around this table or executive directors or whomever the reference was for are receiving the same increase that everybody else received. But I'll tell you this, the last time there was an increase in the district, those people received a 6% increase or whatever it was for the top tier. And then their days, I think it was 4%. And then they are the days of all of those individuals across the board were cut by 6 to 8 days.
So y'all just move them back where they were.
Nobody lifted their head, nobody said anything, they just put their heads down and went back at it. So I'm looking to correct that, and that's one of the things that I'm asking TASB to look at as they come forward. And I don't think that putting the days back to where they were before they were cut is a bad thing. But we will. They were at 228. They were at 228. And this time, and they're working the days. So they're coming in whenever there's a freeze, whenever there's a board meeting, whenever there's a weekend event, whenever there's anything, the people around this table are there. So I'm not feeling uncomfortable about that at all. And we made the proposal in the budget meeting. If you want to go back and look at it, I understand.
Well, I will add, since we're talking a little bit about that right now, that as a board, as an agenda item, there has to be the information provided. And the particular compensation plan was not provided on the dais or on board book for that meeting. So when we voted, I'm voting for pay raises. I'll be quite candid. That's really what I was trying to push. And our entire discussion that evening was on pay raises. We didn't pull the comp plan out and get, hey guys, we're going to vote on it. Any questions on it? So that part is sort of gray, because again, we did review it in April, as you mentioned. But then the other part, since we do have new board members, I still need to give these new board members every opportunity to evaluate information that we're going to look through in this budget cycle. I mean, regardless of how it is, they're new, they have to catch up. We didn't have it, we didn't review it, and there's a question about did we pass it? It doesn't even matter. At the end of the day, we have the ability to amend. And so the rationale we'll ask of you is to make that defense of why you're increasing 10 days at this point and how that's quantified. And
I think I just did.
And so you'll have an opportunity, again, as we vote on it, if you have anything more to add. But bottom line is, when we're trying to be cognizant of how we're spending our funds, 10 days to the highest paid employees is pretty substantial. So what I would want to know is how you quantify that they are working the days, because you say they're working the days. So showcase that so that we have an informed decision and we're not just carte blanche saying, let's increase it by 10 days. We know the data is there.
And again, you're saying increase it by 10 days. And I want to remind you that every principal and every executive person across the district was cut by 6 to 8 days when they received this increase in pay, so no one received an increase in anything. Now, again, we'll make the recommendation.
Sure.
I have no problem with whatever the board consensus is. We will digress and make sure that that happens. But I don't want the impression out there that someone's being given something. It was taken. And nobody said a word. They just did their jobs. And now we're trying to get it back, and it's like we're giving people something. It was taken.
Well, and I will want to know when it was taken. And
it was last year. It was last year.
Where the board adopted a 4% raise for professional. There was a 4% raise adopted, which would have been equivalent to the number of days that we were working. And then the days were reduced without our knowledge.
Without your knowledge. So last year when we adopted the budget, you were not aware that they were reducing days to 220?
Ask around the table. You have the people here at the table.
That is correct. So good discussion. It's part of the rationale that we need to hear, but we didn't talk about it, and it's substantial.
We did mention it in the, I'm not trying to push back, Mr. Macias, I'm really not. It's just that we went through that comp plan page by page, and we did say that I think it's 1 hour and 15 minutes into the recording. So I understand, we'll go back. I just don't want the impression to be that this was done in some underhanded way. We went through the comp plan with the board.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And I'm willing to re-go through it again if you'd like.
Sure. And that's, again, all I'm saying.
Yes,
We
sir.
have an opportunity to revisit that, and I had some concerns. You're addressing some of those concerns I had now, which is fine.
Yes, sir.
But more importantly, I want to move on, because there are some other things, too, just like Ms. Canoyer brought up. Go right ahead, Ms. Canoyer. I'm sure this is related to this, so yes, please.
It actually is. I would really, really like it if we held off on making any changes to what we've have approved in compensation until after the TASB study. Because TASB may come back with recommendations that exceed what you're wanting to fix. They may come back with justification that says, no, that is not a smart thing to do. I really want that expert opinion to guide us as we look through. And I've made it very clear at compensation meetings that I want us to go back and evaluate, can we do more? But we are not there yet because we don't know what needs to be fixed so that we know what kind of money we have to do more with. So I really, and I don't think I'm the only one, I really think that we need to wait on making any adjustments to the compensation plan until after we get the results back from the TASB study. Moving this person here, moving that person there. We've already done some things that we did in April, and we approved this. Let's move forward with what we have now. And when we get TASB back, let's schedule a big workshop where we go through it line by line by line and say, okay, let's fix this, we can do this. And I truly think that's the best way to go about this.
I guess my quick rebuttal to that is we can always do the reverse, too. We could always add if the TASB study says, you guys,
Yeah, but we
you
shouldn't
need.
be taken away if they say take it away.
That'll be up for a board vote. So the bottom line is we can always add to if we decide to go back. It's just, again, we've had the discussion. I appreciate that.
Yes,
That's
sir.
sort of what we didn't have in the last board meeting. But we had it in April, but that's a month and a lifetime ago. And so, but let me get to some other concerns. And those concerns are similar to what Ms. Canoyer said about our focus. This is our time to focus on where we want to allocate resources. And we just haven't had enough discussion about what we're doing with our social emotional efforts, 3.3 with our wraparound services, additional support for students, and wanting a desire on my end to allocate more resources to supporting teachers and students. We haven't talked about that part of the advocacy. So just like transportation and making sure we're addressing that, I want to make sure that we're discussing, too, what we're doing with our resources and if we need to allocate more in that area. It's a big deal, social emotional. And then the other part, just so we are clear, I still would like a snapshot based on competitor and other districts on if our compensation, our raises specifically, are going to be influential enough for retention. The whole purpose of supporting raises for me is to retain talent. If we're not retaining talent and we still have the turnover ratios that are still high, then clearly adding more to percentage on raises is not working. We're not really retaining talent, but we're spending more money with the hope that we retain talent. So more emphasis on, that's why I want to revisit raises. Is there a need to raise it higher or do nothing or allocate resources to support students and teachers in the classroom from our budget? So if it's $1 million for I don't even know, but does it make sense to do that? The task force that Dr. Tagadol is working with teacher retention ideas, this is our time to add it into the budget now. If we know there's something we want to add, we can always amend as well. But that's sort of the discussion that I have not heard. We've talked a lot about raises, we've talked, but we've not talked about, hey, what is the strategy that we're going to recommend coming from administration that's going to help create a better work environment for our employees. And I won't just say teachers, but our employees in general. So again, a million things have happened. So if we've had these discussions, Dr. Field, this is your time to tell me, Mr. Macias, this is what we did. So
I would only say that we're following the same budget plan that was proposed last year. And that's what we put forth. And that's what we tried to guide on as we move forward, because that was our template. And now we have a CFO and a director. And this is.
I have not met formally. I know Ms. Ryan has, but I've not met
please.
the
Yes.
CFO.
We can introduce him right now.
Yes, we would like to introduce our new CFO who just started a couple days ago, and she's Ms. Tiana Landry, right there.
From Comfort.
From Comfort ISD, she joins us from Comfort, and right next to her, we have our new Director of Finance, Ms. Amanda Martinez, and she joins us from Persol. Welcome to Judson.
Excellent addition.
Yes,
Excellent addition.
We couldn't be happier.
Yeah, that is very true. I knew they were here. I could, they were right there, but this is good. But like I said, we need to use our resources and during our budget discussions to advocate for those areas that are important. So I know that when we do program reviews going forward, we'll be able to look specifically at what we may add or not. But I feel like we already know there are problems. Problems is a strong word, but there are areas of opportunity in addressing social emotional.
You're absolutely correct.
Teachers are stressed. There's just a lot going on there that where can we allocate resources now and put it in the budget as sort of, we need to take care of this. And I'll stop there, but that's my input for right now.
Yes, sir. I would only say that when it came to personnel, I surveyed the people that you see around the table, and they were the ones who brought the information to the cabinet, and we made a decision based on the conversations that were had. It wasn't made in a vacuum. I can tell you that we were trying to look for programs as opposed to personnel, because there are, to the point of many of the people that I've heard speak tonight, to onesie-twosie it, to look at certain people and not look at the group as a whole is unfair to the people that we may miss. And I know that there's groups out there that if we don't address them, how could we address others? And to that point, we as a cabinet level have tried to hold that line when people come in and say, hey, give us time, and then we'll make some adjustments. But we can't just take care of the squeaky wheel, because for the person who doesn't squeak, they just put their head down and works, they expect for us to look out for them as well. And the TASB survey is our way to get that done, and for them to come back with a comprehensive recommendation of this is what the district needs to do as a whole to get everybody back where they're supposed to be. And we've seen the lead custodians come in. We've seen several people come in and make that argument. The administrators could come in and make that argument. In our zeal to be competitive with entry salaries, we've compressed our salary as it goes up the scale. Those things need to be adjusted, because a lot of people who are coming in are right underneath the people who have been here for years, decades. And these are things that I think that we need to take a comprehensive look at before we start jumping in saying, fix that one and fix this one, but we've ignored these over here because they weren't the squeaky wheel. So I would just say, as we move through this next year, give us time to look into it. And at the end of next year, we will come back and say, hey, this is what it's going to take to get this fixed.
Well, I would echo back that we are going to give you time.
Yes, sir.
That is certainly something we all expect.
I appreciate it.
But we also expect to pull the trigger when we can.
Understood.
And so that if we don't have to wait till next year, we don't need to wait till next year.
Understood.
That but I will say too, for those that are courageous enough to talk to us and be the squeaky wheel, we know there are 10 others. And so for us not to be responsive to those that are brave enough to come up and say something, it could almost seem like we're callous to those concerns. So as long as we have a timeline, I know we're wrapping a lot of the potential on the TASB study, which is great, but then there's going to be an expectation that we're doing something after we have that study.
I understand completely.
And, okay, that's all. So anyway, I know we had a long, really important discussion about our feelings on this budget. It's important that this board have that discussion. But for the sake of moving forward. Quick,
Really
no,
quick.
go ahead,
Just,
Stephanie.
do we know how we compare with other districts in our recidivism? How many teachers we don't retain, how many we lose? Where do we know that? Where we compare?
We have a question on the exit, the exit survey that speaks to people's reasons for departure. And we see closer to my home, we see an opportunity to move. We see sometimes a better financial opportunity Rarely do we see that I'm leaving because you don't pay enough and we need to go somewhere else. Especially when it comes to recruitment, because we've been very aggressive in making sure that our entry salaries are competitive with the surrounding districts. Now, what that has done, like I said, is it's compressed. Since people have been here longer and worked longer because we didn't increase like we increased at one point in an effort. Stop me if I'm okay. At one point, we increased our custodial staff to where we wanted to get them to $15 an hour. But we didn't simultaneously increase every other custodial pay grade by $2 an hour. And those are the things that we need to come back and look at. So,
Well, again, thank you for all
Yes.
of the input, for the feelings. So I know you are not done, Ms. Davis, or were you completely finished?
No, sir.
Yes. Proceed.
Ms. Ryan's like, no, we got more.
She's done. Were we in debt service?
I would go to debt service. We've already.
Our debt service on page, after page 12 comes page 13. So our debt service budget comparison, I see it missed the number after that. On our local revenue, we had our projected actual for this school year to land on 50, so therefore, 50 million, therefore we're budgeting 54 for next year, with a net change of 4 million. For our state revenue, we are budgeting 1.9 and giving us a total revenue of 55.9. And for our expenditures, we are, debt service and total expenditures within our debt payments would be about 59.5. So that's the debt service budget comparison. That one is usually fairly comparable. And then we had shown on page 14 the proposed budget by functions, because when you adopt in June 22nd, you are required to adopt it at the function level. So that's what you see on page 14. After being able to meet yesterday with Ms. Ryan, she asked that we break it down a bit more, so then you can move on over to the next page, in which you see are the added slides by function with a little more information. You asked us for the actuals, so we're providing the actuals there. For 22-23, by function, you're taking a look at your revenue, state and federal revenues, but then on the expenses, the appropriations that you see there, the actual, for example, if we take a look at the general fund, which is the only one I'll go ahead and review, you can see the appropriations in the different functions: instruction, anything that touches a student, instructional resources, your library, curriculum and instruction. So even though there are different functions there, a lot of those functions are inclusive of anything that deals with instruction, curriculum instruction, and assessment. And so what you see there is what we've actually spent thus far, and what we project, or we're proposing actually for next school year within those specific functions. And that's then, we've now reached the end of the review of our budget.
Ms. Ryan?
All right, yes, this is very helpful, and just so for everybody's background, nobody who did the budget last year or came up with the math of the budget exists anymore. So putting last year's budget against this year's budget, not super helpful, because no one can explain the difference. So looking what we actually spent this year, and then looking at how that reflects on next year, just seemed like it would be a little more helpful to us. So, and I'm glad, because now I am seeing some things. So like, for example, on line, I should have brought my bifocals, like 36 and 41, can we explain why? And I'm going to use the actuals. I'm going to pretend like that's our end of the year, even though I know we have another month and we're going to spend some stuff. But for the sake of argument, let's say it's our end of year. Why would we drop our extracurricular activities by $750,000, but raise the budget for our admin staff at headquarters by $632,000?
What you see there would include some of the amendments that occurred throughout this year because these are the expenditures pieces. So we may have begun our budget with our original adopted budget, and then you see a shift. And so we're still in the process. We actually just uploaded our budgets to Skyward yesterday, actually Monday. So we're going to continue to refine by June 22nd and probably be sharing some of this information with the board between now and then so that you
Okay,
can
because
start.
maybe there were
seeing-
some one-time purchases this year, but I know you also briefed that you were going to budget for 160,000 for band uniforms for next year. That was on one of the assumption slides at
Yep.
some point.
Yes, ma'am.
So when I see a drop in extracurriculars, that freaks me out because I've seen all the student achievements from our extracurriculars parade in front of the board meetings every month. So I wouldn't want to do that. And to see where 632,000 more in our general admin budget, which is the budget that's kind of really been under the public's microscope, adding to
Where's
the
the
head
drop?
shed. This is 36 and 41 are two of the ones I'm looking at.
Where's the drop, though? This is actual, and this is budgeted.
What we're going to budget
So we
next
spent
year.
more.
We spent more.
So,
we're
so like
budgeting.
general admin has spent 7.2 million this year, but y'all are giving yourself 7.9 next year.
To get this.
I mean, you're giving yourself another 632 up in general admin.
You keep saying that, Ms. Ryan. I take offense now because you're trying to push a point, and I don't understand where this $632,000 to general admin is coming from.
What?
And we didn't promote any $632,000.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm looking, if you subtract this by this, so what, like anything, I could understand little variations. So obviously, little variations, toilet paper costs more. I get those. But I guess what would be helpful is to know anything that changed by more than a couple 100,000, either up or down.
Yes, ma'am.
It'd be helpful to know why. So like, did something go up $1 million because we have a big purchase next year? Or did something go down $1 million because we had a big purchase last year type thing? Or have we told departments to cut? Are we, having less buses or less charter buses or more textbooks or something like that? It'd be nice to know because some of these are off by like a good $1 million, which is a
I
fair
would say,
chunk of
but
change.
these are actuals, not encumbrances, and not what's going to happen until the end of the year. It's just actual right now.
Okay.
So if you were to, I asked them to look at, let's go back to general administration. We have projected, which would be not the actual, but the projected for the end of June at 7.8 million.
Okay.
And what's budgeted is 7.9.
Okay.
So
Then,
people- yeah.
so
And
all of
then
these
maybe
numbers are,
salaries
this is
are
just
not
based on where we
included
are
yet
right
with this
now,
last-
not based
yeah.
on.
Okay. So
And
there may
there's
be
a lot of
some other things.
encumbrances, specifically, lots of goods and services that we received throughout the month of June, so a lot of POs that haven't been paid out. Once that gets posted and we bring it to you, and I know it seems like, well, is it going to change that much within a couple of weeks? If you've
Some
seen
departments
our
it might.
numbers, yes, they really can. And so I would ask that you give us some time. We will
Okay.
provide a more
Detailed.
specific, more
Okay.
detailed.
Based
as-
on encumbrances and
Yes.
what's happening
As
and
we're
what we
able to
should
close
be
out.
at.
Yeah, because I definitely don't want to cut anybody's budget without there being a good reason or know what we're losing because of that. And I don't think we want to increase anybody's budget unless we know what tremendous gains we might be getting out of that and how that kind of directly relates to instruction.
I thought you were
Seeing it
talking
side by
about the
side.
table. I apologize.
Oh, yeah.
I
No,
thought
no,
y'all was
I was
like,
just doing
really?
math. I'm
We
like-
didn't give anybody
I'm an
600.
advocate.
I was like, my bad. I
All I did was
apologize.
subtract things. There's these numbers. So. Ceci and I have become great friends. through this
Yes, we have.
process. We have. So if it ever looks like we're going tit for tat back and forth, it's all in good fun. So, yeah, so some more details, but
Yeah.
I personally, is this helpful to anybody else, the way it's kind of laid out? I don't, that way people want to see more things. Correct.
Yeah, and honestly, and that's part of the entire budget process.
Yeah.
We started board members back in February, and our numbers each time look different because everything is always in flux until the day that you adopt it. It's in flux because as we receive revenue, we're projecting such revenue. We don't get payments until after we adopt. We don't have final values until after we adopt.
Rumors
All
of
those-
legislature.
Legislature is in there. There are so many factors, moving factors. We start talking to you about projected budget with an ADA that we don't have until the end of the year. All of those pieces are just constantly moving pieces. So each time and that's why we have so many budget workshops. And so each time that we come to you, we just adopted a new system. And our brand new lady sitting back there just got their budget. We just input all the budget into the Skyward system yesterday. And so all that to say, we've been working off huge Excel spreadsheets. And as Dr. Fields said, none of us were here. I cannot tell you why some of the decisions were made, but I can tell you that one thing we do promise as an administration on behalf of Dr. Fields is that we're going to do our best to give you more exact numbers each and every time that we come to you. And I think that that's what you
Throughout the instructional year.
Thank you so much. You guys are awesome.
Yes, ma'am. And so that's where we were. So one of the things maybe I should have made clear is that doesn't include any of the salaries for June, and it also doesn't include any of the encumbrances. And I will tell you, we get our final end of year and we close it out by then. That concludes my piece.
Well, I do want to just go around. I want to make sure this has been a very good conversation. If there's any last comments, I'll start over with Ms. Canoyer. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I think I've said my say.
Okay. I'll skip you for a second, Ms. Ryan. Ms. Rodriguez, anything you'd like to add?
No, I'm good. I think I've expressed my opinions about the things that are happening.
Well, good. Ms. Stanford?
I was going to ask if we could somehow have an idea of how many positions there are in the district. So instead of just seeing an outline of executive directors make this, assistant principals make this, could we see how many we have? Could we get some idea of how many we are supporting in the district of all the different positions? At some point, could we start getting an idea, an overview, so that we know how many, not just what one particular position is being paid, but how many of those positions do we have?
In the professional paper?
In everything. So, because we know we're paying them, so it'd be nice to have, especially since I represent and Monica represents the entire district. I'd like to know what the entire district is, how we're functioning. How many moving pieces are there? How many positions are we, and where are they?
You mean like we got a principal at every school, we got 8, is that what you're talking about?
How many principals do we have? How many assistant principals do we have? How many do we have?
Well, and I will add that it's similar to what I had requested a couple of months ago that I know we're working on, where I asked how many directors, executive directors, specialists, coordinators do we have now compared to what we had in 2019? Because we need to get a sense of how much that has grown so that we can look at potential restructuring, if anything. It could be minimal, or it could be a lot. I think maybe that's a little bit of what you're asking for, Ms. Stanford. But
An overview.
yeah, just a sense. And I know that study or that assessment should be coming. I know that when we have our discussion about internal auditors, that's something that we'll ask, because again, we need to know if we ballooned a lot in the middle management position with the.
Can we focus on there then instead of every position and, you know?
Would you be okay with that, Ms. Stanford, since you're the one making the request? I don't want to speak on your behalf.
To start?
Sure. That's where I expected us to be starting. So we just need to kind of get some sense of that.
That's not, we can,
Yeah,
we'll get that back quickly.
I think that'd be important.
I would just caution, though, that once we give you the information, to arbitrarily start moving people around.
The goal is to get ahead of next year and the
I
year
would-
after.
right.
I mean, it's not to say, hey, we want to know. It's really to look at the cost of the increased staff that we have as coordinators, directors. And again, I'm concerned about the next couple of years in terms of our budget. And can we carry the personnel? And what's the return on investment for each person? How's it impacting student success?
Makes
All of that
perfect sense.
stuff.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Ms. Stanford, do you have anything else you wanted to add? Ms. Eaton?
I just put minute on
You put what?
it. Just trust me.
minimum?
No, mint.
Oh,
Yeah, so we don't need it long, 'cause we'll be-
looks like we'll talk later.
oh, yes, we will.
At this point, I think we can close. Ms. King, most important Vice President, any last comments?
This is a great breakdown, overview of our budget and also our timeline, so thank you guys very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, I think we can conclude the budget
Yes,
part
sir.
of it and get to our closed session item.
Thank you.
So,
Let's go ahead. You want to move?
yeah, let me go ahead and read that. And thank you all for your work on the budget and for your input today.
Appreciate it. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. The board will now adjourn into closed session pursuant to the following sections of the Texas Open Meeting Act. We're going to, let me get the agenda. We're going to go to closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 551.074, discussing personnel, the personnel report and updates, including new hires, resignations, and administrative appointments. The Converse Elementary School principal. All right, the time is now 8:41. No final action will be taken while the board is in closed session.
your personnel report?
The board will now reconvene in open session. The time is now 9:05. No final decision or action or vote was taken while the board was in closed session. So we have a discussion item or action item for the personnel report. Can I get a,
I move that we approve the personnel report as discussed in closed session.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Ms. Rodriguez, second by Ms. Stanford. Okay. All in favor? Oh, Ms. Eaton. Ms. Eaton, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, it carries. So there being no further business, we now adjourn at 9:06. No. All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.